Okay, welcome back and good evening. Thank you. We are ready to reconvene our council meeting and begin the public portion of this evening's agenda. Can I ask our city attorney to read out any items from the closed session?
Items 1A and 1B were discussed, and 1D were discussed with no reportable action taken. That was 1A, 1B, and 1D. Item 1C is Leonard versus City of Santa Monica. Mr. Leonard filed this lawsuit against the city after being apprehended by a canine unit in connection with an arrest. The city attorney's office is recommending settlement in the amount of $99,000 in order to avoid the expense and burden of litigation.
Move settlement.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Moreno?
Yes.
Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem O'Day.
Yes.
That concludes the closed session report.
Thank you. Clerk, could we call the two items?
Did you want to do agenda management
I
first?
do want to do agenda management
Okay.
first. To begin with, I understand that our item 3G on the consent calendar requires at least 5 members present to vote, and Councilmember Hara recuses herself on this item, so that only leaves 4, so I believe we'll not be hearing that item. Item 2B is being pulled, and item 3K is being continued to the November 12th meeting. And I think that's it for agenda management, unless Councilmember Winter tells me otherwise.
No, that one speaker I was hoping to get to speak early is not going to speak, so
Okay,
thank you.
very good.
So next we have the commendations. It's well-being migrant recipients.
Okay. Well, we have a commendation. I'll come down to the podium to introduce this item tonight. And tonight we have in attendance a group of community members who went above and beyond through leadership in the second round of Wellbeing Microgrants. We celebrate and commend them for their wisdom, energy, and action of the community tonight. And, yes, and we're going to do simultaneous translation. So consecutive.
Hoy contamos con la presencia de un grupo de miembros de la comunidad quienes fueron más allá a través de su liderazgo en la segunda ronda de los microgrants de Wellbeing Project. Celebramos y elogiamos su sabiduría, su energía y la acción de la comunidad esta noche.
We would also like to thank the following for their support of our Wellbeing Microgrants. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health 2016 Prize provided the funding for the microgrants. Cities of Service supported the development of the microgrant program. City Grows partnered as the online platform for the application process. Staff from Virginia Avenue Park Center and the Pico Branch Library provided invaluable outreach support and partnership, and our city departments, in particular Housing and Economic Development's Buy Local program.
También queremos agradecer a las siguientes personas y departamentos por su apoyo al programa de microgrants de Wellbeing. El premio de Culture of Health de la Fundación Robert Wood Foundation 2016, quien proveyó el subsidio para los microgrants. Cities of Service, quien apoyó también el desarrollo del programa. City Grows, quien fue compañera conforme la plataforma en línea se iba desarrollando en el proceso. Todos los trabajadores y personas del centro de Virginia Avenue Park y de Pico Library Branch, quienes también hicieron alcance comunitario, apoyaron y dieron su compañerismo. Y todos los departamentos de la ciudad, en particular el Housing Economic Development programa Buy Local.
Additionally, 3 microgrant leaders attended PACE LA, which is the Pacific Asian Consortium in Entrepreneurship. It's an entrepreneur training program in September. And in the course of this excellent program, each participant put together a business plan, the proper business license and permits, and worked with business counselors to get started.
De igual forma, 3 líderes del programa Microgrant fueron al programa de entrenamiento de PACE LA en septiembre y durante el curso de este programa tan excelente, cada participante tuvo la oportunidad de crear un plan de negocios, aplicar para las licencias de negocios correspondientes, permisos y trabajaron también con personas que les ayudaron a empezar su pequeño negocio.
This evening, we have representatives from Antenna Los Angeles facilitating interpretation in Spanish. Antenna Los Angeles is dedicated to language justice advocacy and organizing locally in Los Angeles. They believe that everyone has the basic human right to speak in the language in which they feel most comfortable at a given time. Their work creating multilingual spaces with the Pico Wellbeing Project made public meetings more accessible to Santa Monicans.
Y esta noche contamos con la representación de miembros de Antena Los Ángeles, quienes están facilitando interpretación al español. Antena Los Ángeles es una colectiva dedicada a la justicia del lenguaje y a fomentarla en Los Ángeles. Creemos que la justicia del lenguaje es el derecho básico que todos tenemos de comunicarnos, entender y ser entendidos en el idioma en el que nos sentimos más cómodos. Y nuestro trabajo creando espacios multilingües con el programa el Wellbeing Project de Pico ha hecho las juntas públicas mucho más accesibles para los miembros de la comunidad.
Now, we couldn't have this honor this evening without hearing from our mayor because this program is so special to her, and she couldn't be here tonight in person, so she has provided us with a video.
Hi, it's Mayor Colleen Davis. I'm sorry I can't be there tonight to celebrate all the microgrant recipients, but I just want to let you know how excited we are for your projects that not only economically empower our community, but build a sense of community within Santa Monica. I can't be there tonight, but I look forward to seeing each and every one of you at our Wellbeing Summit on November 16th. I'm so proud of you all that you saw a need and you filled a need, and you are doing great things for our community, and we look forward to hearing more from each and every one of you. Thanks.
We thank the mayor for that video and hope that she'll bring the audio with us when we return.
Usually she's not difficult to hear. We also have with us a young leader, Tyson Clark, whom we would like to acknowledge for organizing a Pico Community Neighborhood Cleanup Day this summer. His idea came to us through the Wellbeing Microgrants, and while it wasn't an economic opportunity-focused project, it was a great idea to support the community and found a natural fit with the goals of the Pico Wellbeing Project. Tyson's Community Cleanup Day resulted in more than 25 participants filling up 2 dumpsters worth of trash and recycling from around Virginia Avenue Park, making our community safer, cleaner, and more beautiful. It also led to new connections between neighbors of all ages and sparked interest in regular community cleanups. Thank you, Tyson.
También contamos con la presencia de un joven líder, Tyson Clark, a quien queremos reconocer por organizar el Día de Limpieza del Vecindario Pico este verano. Su idea vino a nosotros a través del Wellbeing Microgrants y mientras no fue un proyecto enfocado en Economic Opportunity, fue una súper idea para apoyar a la comunidad y fue totalmente un buen modelo para las metas que tenemos en el proyecto de Pico Wellbeing. El día de limpieza de Tyson resultó en más de 25 participantes llenando 2 basureros muy grandes llenos de basura y de reciclaje alrededor del parque de Virginia Avenue, haciendo nuestra comunidad más segura, más limpia y más hermosa. También nos llevó a hacer más conexiones entre los miembros del vecindario de todas las edades y así como incitó el interés para hacer más limpiezas comunitarias. Así que muchas gracias a Tyson.
Next, I'd like to read our microgrant commendations. Let me tell you what's in this package, and then I'll tell you something about each of the individuals. The commendations read, whereas in 2019, the Office of Civic Wellbeing issued its second call for resident-driven projects to address findings from the Wellbeing Index, and whereas 7 residents were selected to receive 6 Wellbeing microgrants, a $500 award designed to increase economic opportunity through entrepreneurship and financial empowerment. And whereas each project was selected based on the strength of the idea, the implementation plan, and creativity in bringing community together, and whereas each microgrant recipient successfully fulfilled their responsibility and commitment to participation, leadership, reporting, and measurement, and whereas the 6 projects reached over 200 people via 27 neighborhood events and activities over 3 months, now therefore I, Terry O'Day, Mayor Pro Tempore of the City of Santa Monica, on behalf of the members of the City Council, do hereby commend and recognize the following individuals. And let me pause to translate that.
Estas son las menciones del programa de microgrants, donde en el 2019 la oficina de Civic Wellbeing publicó su segunda llamada para proyectos que fueran dirigidos por residentes, donde 7 residentes fueron seleccionados para recibir 6 Wellbeing Microgrants, un premio de $500 designado para incrementar una oportunidad económica a través del emprendimiento y empoderamiento financiero, donde cada proyecto fue seleccionado basado en la fuerza de la idea, su plan de implementación y la creatividad en traer a la comunidad junta, donde cada persona que recibió el microgrant exitosamente llenó su responsabilidad o cumplió con su responsabilidad y con su compromiso, la participación, liderazgo, presentación de informes, medida, y donde los 6 proyectos llegaron a más de 200 personas a través de 27 vecindarios, eventos y actividades en el curso de 3 meses. Ahora yo, Terry, vicepresidente de la ciudad de Santa Mónica, en nombre de los miembros del Consejo de la Ciudad, menciono y reconozco a esas personas.
Very good. So first, I'd like to recognize Monica Armendariz for the Wellbeing Microgrant Project, Bring the Community Together Wednesdays. It was a series of classes where attendees learned how to make and sell their own jewelry products to generate extra income and give back to local and small business.
Okay, primero tenemos a Mónica Armendariz. Para el proyecto de Wellbeing Microgrant, ella desarrolló el miércoles de reunir a la comunidad, que era una serie de clases donde las personas que atendieron aprendieron cómo crear su propia joyería y para poder incrementar su ingreso, y así como para retribuir a los negocios pequeños locales.
Thank you. Next we have Somya Monjal and Danny Donare. Is that okay? I'm sorry. For the Wellbeing Microgrant Project, Building Humble Confidence Through Economic Empowerment. It's a workshop in partnership with John Adams Middle School Vision Program to share simple business skills, tools for socioeconomic empowerment and leadership for middle school students, and challenging young people's mindsets through listening skills and building empathy. Somya and Danny?
Segundo tenemos a Somya Mujal y Dani Donaire. Para el proyecto de Wellbeing Microgrant hicieron un taller en compañía con la escuela John Adams que se llamó Building Humble Confidence Through Economic Empowerment, para crear las herramientas necesarias para hacer negocios sencillos y empoderamiento socioeconómico, así como un programa de liderazgo para estudiantes de la escuela media, así como retar a sus ideas a través de herramientas para escuchar y para crear empatía.
Very good. Next we have Inez Garcia for the Wellbeing Microgrant Project, Oaxacan Craft Business, a small business whose goal is to demonstrate and share traditional Oaxacan culture with the Santa Monica community through the sale of artisanal handmade products at community events. Inez?
En tercer lugar tenemos a Inés García. Para el proyecto ella hizo un pequeño negocio llamado Oaxacan Craft Business, cuya meta era demostrar y compartir la cultura tradicional oaxaqueña con la comunidad de Santa Mónica a través de la venta de artesanías hechas a mano en eventos comunitarios.
Okay, next we have Kimberly Heron for the Wellbeing Microgrant Project Pop-Up Beauty Supply Store Hair Parlor, the first Black Creole-owned beauty supply business in Santa Monica, which fills a community need for a local Santa Monica-based supply of a range of Black hair care products and brings together barbers, hairstylists, and the community. Thank you.
También tenemos a Kimberly Heron con el proyecto, Pop-Up Beauty Supply Store Hair Parlor, que es la primera tienda de productos de belleza en Santa Mónica, de quien es dueña una mujer de raza negra y criolla. Y también llena la necesidad de una tienda que venda productos para el cabello de personas afrodescendientes en Santa Mónica, y también reúne a personas que trabajan en el negocio del cabello, como barberos, personas que cortan cabello y también la comunidad.
Okay, and then we have Marco Marin for the Wellbeing Microgrant Project by Pico campaign, a campaign to help connect small businesses in the Pico neighborhood to resources and new business, and serving as an inflection point for economic development. Marco?
Y por último, a Marco Marín. Su proyecto era Buy Pico Campaign, que fue una campaña que ayudaba a conectar los pequeños negocios en el vecindario Pico a recursos para crear nuevos negocios, sirviendo como un punto para desarrollo económico.
One person not present tonight, so in absentia, I'd like to just also recognize Linda Myers. Do you translate Latin in absentia? Linda Myers for the Wellbeing Microgrant Project Money and Financial Improvement Classes, a workshop series about improving financial and money wellness and how to implement the knowledge that has been gained. We thank you all for your dedication and service to our community.
Y a pesar de que no está la última participante presente el día de hoy, queremos reconocerla también, quien es Linda Myers, con su proyecto Money and Financial Improvement Classes, que fue una serie de talleres sobre mejorar tus finanzas personales, así como el bienestar económico y cómo implementar este conocimiento que se ha ganado durante las clases que se dieron. Y también queremos agradecerles a todos por su dedicación y por el servicio a nuestra comunidad.
Thank you all. So again, item 2B has been pulled from our agenda this evening. So our clerk, could you call 2C?
2C is a presentation, Presidium and anti-abuse policy.
Good evening, Council. Tonight, I am pleased to introduce Aaron Lundberg, the founder and CEO of Presidium. As Mr. Lundberg will explain, Presidium is an organization based in Texas that is dedicated to helping organizations put in place best practices to detect and prevent abuse in youth programs. As you know, our community has been horrified and heartbroken by allegations that a former city employee abused children in connection with the city youth program in the 1980s and 1990s. I want to be sure the community is aware that the allegations do not relate to current city activities. The most recent appears to relate to the early 2000s. The former employee involved is also no longer employed by the city and indeed is deceased. But the fact that these claims relate to the past, not the present, does not make them any less heartbreaking. As Mr. Lundberg will explain, we cannot stop deeply ill and deceitful people from existing in the world, but we will do everything in our power to ensure that they are not involved in our city programs. That's why we brought in Presidium, a group of experts that has worked with the University of California, California State University, the YMCA, Google, and others to put best practices in place. As much as we might wish to, we cannot change any events from 20 years ago, but we can take the opportunity to be the best we can be now and in the future, and we are committed to doing so. With that, I am delighted to introduce Aaron Lundberg and for all of you to hear from him this evening.
Good evening, City Council. I wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that we have done with the City of Santa Monica, the process that we underwent to do that, and talk about some of the higher level findings and some next steps. But before I get into that, let me create a little bit of a context to let you know who Presidium is and the methodology that we use to help manage this risk. As Lane mentioned, Presidium is a risk management company out of Dallas-Fort Worth, and the only risk that we manage is the risk of a child or a vulnerable adult from being physically or sexually abused within an institution. And so we've been doing this for 25 years now. We were born out of an incident, a horrible incident in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where a young boy was sexually molested by a volunteer in a large youth-serving organization. And a team of researchers at that time knew all too well that it happened, but had no idea how it happened. So they used a methodology called root cause analysis to analyze all of the cases that they could gather over a period of time to figure out what the root causes were. They also looked into the problem. These statistics are not from 25 years ago, they're from today, but they haven't changed all that much. And so what we know all too well is that this happens way more than we would like. And so it's estimated that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 7 boys will be sexually abused before they turn the age of 18. It's estimated that 10% of school children will be sexually abused by a school personnel. That does not include bullying or hazing before they graduate high school. We know that a large number of incidents occur by other youth. And so we look to manage adult to child as well as child to child abuse. And then last but not least, we know all too well that this goes unreported almost 80% of the time. And so that's the bad news. The good news is this is a preventable risk. This is not like a natural disaster. In Dallas-Fort Worth, we have tornadoes. Here you have earthquakes, and there's nothing that you can do to prevent those from happening that we know of yet. However, what we can do is we can respond really well to minimize the consequences of those. Well, this isn't that risk. And so while we learn of an incident, we want to respond really well to minimize the impact to the child, to the community. There is a lot that we can do to prevent these from ever occurring. And so, as I mentioned, we used a root cause analysis of over 4,000 cases. And what we find is the good news is there's not 4,000 reasons these cases happen. The bad news is there's not a silver bullet. There's not one root cause. What we see instead is they clump into 8 different categories. So there's 8 different root causes that will either prevent or can contribute, depending on whether something's in place or not in place, to these cases. And so this is a very manageable risk. And so we have best practice standards under each of these operations that organizations strive towards to make sure that they have safe practices in place. And so Those are the things an organization needs to do to manage the risk. But equally important, organizations, institutions have to have a culture of safety to support those things. This is a really challenging risk to manage. It's a low frequency yet high effect event, so it's easy to not do things the right way because you kind of get away with it. And over time, you kind of learn that's not something you really need to do because nothing really bad happened. And so what we have to have happen is you have to have a culture in place to really keep the awareness up and ensure that those things aren't just something that goes on a shelf that's written down, but it's really alive within an organization. So we focus equally on making sure there's the right culture, all with the goal to get organizations toward commitment. And so we can put organizations or individuals into three camps. One is a camp of complacency. And so this is where an organization feels like this could never happen to them. They can never have a child abused under their watch. They know everybody. This is a different industry's problem, whatever it may be. Where we're seeing more organizations go to is a compliance mindset. So this is where organizations realize that there's a risk, but then they jump to kind of check the box fixes to manage it. And so those are things like background checks. Those are things like being sure you're under ratio, making sure we're doing mandated training. And that's better than complacency, yet that doesn't effectively manage this risk. And so where we're really trying to go is to an area of commitment, where we're doing the right things the right way on an ongoing basis to ensure that we're keeping our youth safe within our programs. And so we were brought in to do a risk assessment. We've been doing risk assessments, as I mentioned, for 25 years. We've done it with very large multi-location organizations like YMCA of the USA, Boys and Girls Club of America, large university systems, large school districts, and so on and so forth. And what it allows us to do is determine an organization's unique strengths and some areas that they can improve on in terms of that safety equation that I showed earlier. And so this is the overall process that we always take. And so we do a lot of planning, we do a lot of data collection on site, we analyze that, and then we present our findings. And so for the City of Santa Monica, back in January of 2019, we began this process. We started the process with a training/informational meeting with all of the youth serving organizations leadership. It was one, meant to get them kind of engaged in the process, but secondly, to let them know what to expect. And then we also provided some resources for the city to use to help manage this risk in terms of model policies and screening and selection instruments, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then in March of 2019, we conducted our first on-site visit. We conducted a second visit in the summer of July 2019, and then in August of 2019, we presented our findings and recommendations. Specifically, here is the methodology that we used to assess your programs. And so we conducted over 105 interviews, and that ranged anywhere from direct care staff, supervisors, administrators, upper levels leadership. We conducted 38 program and departmental visits. So that's all of your youth serving programs, your day camps, your after-school programs, your community-based programming, your tutoring, mentoring, aquatics programs, youth sports, etc. We reviewed all of your system-wide and program-specific policies, your training curricula, your screening and selection instrumentation, and your responding procedures. And so at the end of that, when we reviewed our findings, first and foremost, we found a lot of strengths within the city that we can build on. And so you all, as you probably know, have incredibly dedicated employees and leadership who are really engaged and committed to managing this risk. And so we do this quite a bit, and when we interview people for this process and learn about what they do, sometimes we get kind of yes and no answers, and they're a little guarded, and sometimes we get really engaged individuals, and that's exactly what we found here, is that everyone was excited that the city has taken on this. They were very open, candid, honest, sometimes critical, but that was what we were asking for in terms of what could be doing better. But they were very much engaged, and that's always a strong sign. You all have very strong screening practices in place. So you have good screening practices for employees and for volunteers. Those include LiveScan, which is a background checking system that you probably are aware of. You have standardized application process. You do multiple interviews. And so that was a real strength of the cities. You all have required mandated reporting training for all employees. And then many city programs that we visited already had strong policies and procedures to protect youth. Areas of improvement, and kind of hitting on that last strength, is if I was to categorize these items in two different categories, it would be one, sometimes we found very strong program-specific policy and procedures, but they weren't standardized across like programs. And so anytime we work in an organization that offers similar programs in different departments, there's always a challenge to ensure that this day camp, and I'm just using that as a generic example, not for specific findings here, this day camp under this department should operate in terms of abuse risk the same way as this day camp in this department. And so that's an area of standardization that we have recommended. Also, in regards to reporting policies, we recommend some standardization. And then the second overarching piece here is awareness. And so you all have some good things in place, but some staff weren't always aware of some of those things. And that's just an ongoing battle that every organization has to go through. And so some staff are unaware of the staff to youth ratios. You all have an anonymous reporting mechanism, and there's a lack of awareness of that. So those are very fixable things. Those are things, as I mentioned, that are very common that we see across organizations. And so high-level recommendations, I'm not going to go into depth on most of these, but overall, we made a recommendation to build on your youth protection policies and focus more towards on prevention. And so as I mentioned in the very beginning, organizations all over the United States will start with really making sure that we're training people on the warning signs of abuse and that we're training them how to respond to that once they identify it. And that's really important, because that's how we help these survivors and these victims recover. However, that does very little to actually prevent the abuse. And so we want to have equal policies, equal trainings, equal procedures in place that prevent these incidents, just as we do to respond. We recommend establishing a cross-departmental program, youth protection committee, and standardized youth protection policies and best practices through the entire city. So you guys are already in process for this, and this speaks to making sure that like programs have the like safety mechanisms in place. Centralized coordination of volunteers. You all have already hired a volunteer coordinator. You all have thousands of volunteers. You have a very engaged community. And what we know is that volunteers have as much, if not sometimes more, access, privacy, and control with children as employees do based on their position. And so we want to centralize how we're bringing them in, how we're training them, the policies that we're operating under, to ensure that if they have a higher level of access to youth, that they're screened, trained, and there's policies accordingly. Design and implement a standardized training for all city employees that serve children. Implement standard reporting procedures that go beyond just reporting suspicions of abuse, but as equally as important for reporting red flag behaviors that don't raise to the level of abuse, as well as youth-to-youth abuse or inappropriate interactions. And then last but not least, ensure that everybody, no matter what their role is, understands that safety is part of their job responsibility. We've seen some organizations who really put this responsibility on quote-unquote the direct care worker. So that could be a child care worker, a teacher, a foster parent, camp counselor, but they forget to roll out the same policies, procedures, trainings to people like maintenance, front desk, even leadership. And they have a really important role and can be empowered to manage this risk. And so we want to get to commitment, and we talk about the 3 C's, and this is the model that we use to help organizations get there. And so this will not happen unless there's strong leadership support, because this is a challenging risk to manage. People don't want to talk about it. And what we found is kind of the singular most important thing organizations can do is making sure that there's strong leadership and there's a constant voice that this is important. Then we want to establish these standards that we've been talking about, and then we have to resource those standards. So we don't want to tell all of our programs, do this, do this, do this, without giving them the proper policies, procedures, instrumentation, training to fulfill those. And then once we've given them the right resources to fulfill those standards, we have to create accountability systems. And so once we say, do these 5 things, we want to then create a system where we're going out, making sure those 5 things are being done, and then making sure those 5 things are effective as well. Next step, many of these you all are in the process of doing, forming a youth protection committee who will take this on and be the case manager, if you will, to ensure that these things come and are put in place. Roll out a new citywide youth protection policy and code of conduct, implement citywide policies and procedures as we've been talking about, and then we want to continue to provide support and consultation as you do this. And so our relationship with the city doesn't end now. Really, the hard work begins in terms of putting these things in place, and we want to be any assistance any way we can in regards to that endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to present some of this work to you. City leadership and the City Attorney's Office and Presidium have been working together to put these things in place. We do intend to return to you with a resolution with some of these items, but given the importance, we wanted you to know what's happening in the city, that this has been happening since January, and all the efforts that are being made, not just to express the commitment, but to move the commitment through every layer of this organization, and to take this opportunity and try to find the best that we can be out of it.
Thank you. I know this is important to our entire council. Thank you for presenting tonight. That was really good work.
Thank you.
Clerk, can you call the consent calendar?
The consent calendar, all items will be considered and approved in one motion unless removed by a council member for discussion, and you have 2 requests to speak.
Okay, our first request is from Denise Barton, and our second is John C. Smith. Can you please approach the podium? Denise? Denise, you're up.
Good evening. Let's begin by asking ourselves why Santa Monica College needs another over $1 million to create an early childhood lab school program. But the real question is, who's financially responsible for it after it opens? I mean, if Santa Monica College has all of these bonds taking money from the residents, with this action, one would have to wonder if Santa Monica College has a problem being financially responsible. Also notice that this includes furniture, equipment, fixtures, and startup costs. So now we have to wonder how much more this will cost us, considering this is only the First Amendment. And of course, we have to go back to recycling wastewater or sewage. Here I have to come back to the question of, have they figured out how to get all the diseases out of the water yet? Because if the residents are using this water for their gardens, might the diseases from the water get into the food through the soil? Oh, but I forgot, everything with you is all about image and not reality. I'm starting to look at you like my building's ownership and management who only cares about the money and not the tenants. Just like you only care about the money and the image, not the residents. And finally, if you're upgrading traffic signal equipment on Montana, would that include the power supply? Because if it does, you might consider relocating your electric vehicle charging stations to Montana instead of the neighborhoods like Wilmot, where you already have a significant lack of parking. Thank you.
Okay, John C. Smith. You gonna waive your opportunity? Okay, council members, the consent calendar is before us. As a reminder, we pulled items 3G and 3K.
I got something
Councilmember
to
Hart? No? Councilmember Morena?
I'd like to pull 3D. My family has a business on the pier to avoid any perceived conflicts.
Okay.
So maybe we should hear 3D and give Councilmember Moreno the opportunity to vomit those.
Okay. 3D? Do we have someone who can present 3D for us?
Well, I have a procedural question
Yeah.
before we do. Does this require the allocation of money? And if it does, then we don't have the 5 votes we need.
It's, no.
It does
This
not.
one- No, this
This
is
is money that's already been budgeted. We're just
This is, yes.
okay.
Right.
So item 3D is the award bid and enter into construction contract with Metro Builders and Engineer Group LTD for pier below deck fire sprinkler replacement project phase 1.
Well, I don't need a staff report. I don't want the pier to burn down, so I'll move item 3D.
Second.
Clerk, do we have the roll call then? That was moved by Winter, second by Hara. Heard.
Councilmember Hara,
Yes.
Councilmember Winter,
Yes.
Councilmember McKeown,
Yes.
and Mayor Pro Tem O'Day.
Yes. Could we bring Councilmember Marina back? Thanks, Lori. Okay, Council, the remainder of the consent calendar is before us.
With the exception of items 3D, which has been voted on, and 3G and 3K, which were removed, I move the remainder of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, motion by McEwen, second by Hara. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Morena? Yes. Councilmember McKeown,
Yes.
Councilmember Winter,
Yes.
Councilmember Hara,
Yes.
and Mayor Pro Tem O'Day.
Yes. That passes. Thank you.
Next, we have item 7A, and it's introduction and first reading of an ordinance amending section 8.08.060B and adding chapter 8.98 to the municipal code establishing requirements for construction management plans, and you have no request to speak.
Okay. Do we have a staff report? We got him. We got out ahead of him.
Council, if we-
You have a staff report. I was going to say, having read the written staff report, perhaps we can proceed. But if there's an oral staff report available, sure.
Okay.
Council, I actually do not have a staff report for you, but I do have something that I need to chime in on this item, so I can take the opportunity to fill the space. You have 2 items before you that we discovered late amend the same section of the municipal code. So following the staff presentation, I would like to present to you a revised ordinance that nothing in the substance will change, but we will take out the revision you would be making here to add the words construction management plan to one section of the municipal code, and we will do that later in the evening when you actually look at the building code. So it's a non-substantive change, but if you would give me the opportunity before you make your motion to put that language on display so that we have a clean code when you're done making your decisions.
Got it. Thanks. Okay, welcome. We're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I'm Grace Page, Senior Planner with the Planning Division. And tonight before your consideration is the first reading and introduction amending Section 8.08.060B and adding Chapter 8.98 to the Santa Monica Municipal Code. The purpose and goal of this proposed language is to establish a requirement for submitting a construction management plan for certain construction projects. It's also to provide a comprehensive preview of the construction logistics before a building permit is issued. And it's also to foresee coordination of multiple projects and assist better serving the public with construction-related issues. What is a construction management plan, you might be asking? It's a series of documents and exhibits that essentially serves as a logistics guidebook for the construction activity that would occur around and on the site. This was an interdepartmental effort and one that staff initiated. Construction management plan applicability would apply to the following project types. It would need to meet the criteria both listed in A as well as criteria B. So, for example, if the project is of one of the 3 categories listed in criteria A and also requires closure or restricting access of a public right-of-way due to excavation or hauling of materials off the site, it would then require the submittal of a construction management plan. So I'll go over criteria A very quickly here for you. So if the construction involves 7,500 square feet or more of new or added non-residential floor area, That's one project type. The second project type would be any construction of 16 or new or added residential units. And the last type is specific to the downtown area. It would be for projects that are 1,000 square feet or more of new or added non-residential floor area. Now that threshold in the downtown is a bit lower because that is where the new ones, the potential for temporary effects for construction could be more nuanced. There's higher density there. There's more higher volumes of vehicular and bus routes and all the pedestrian and bike activity in that area. So the threshold for the downtown is lower. Let me add one more thing. So in the absence of a general requirement, projects that are only approved through a development review permit or development agreement may have a condition that would require the submittal of a construction management plan. There are projects that are coming to the downtown and elsewhere in the city that may not have that requirement as a condition of the approval, and hence the ordinance is before you. Next steps. Should the council go with the staff recommendation for this particular language, staff would then formalize content and format of the construction management plan submittal, and it would include a checklist and/or application forms and potentially exhibits added by the builder. And then the PCD director would have the authority to adopt any administrative regulations to exercise this chapter. The staff recommendation is to introduce the first reading of the subject ordinance. I myself in city planning, as well as my colleagues in public works and PCD divisions are also available to answer questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Council, do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember McEwen?
I have two. Thank you for the brief presentation. I appreciate the brevity. I have a couple of questions, though, that don't seem to have been answered. It's been suggested to us that when we charge a fee for the use of public space during construction, that we charge more for the use of space that impedes traffic, pedestrian traffic, or otherwise some right-of-way than we do, for instance, for the use by construction of a parking space. Have we considered that, having two tiers of fee?
So I have my colleague from Public Works, Curtis Castle, who can go over the use of public property and sort of the fees that are associated with that.
And don't go away too far, because I have a second question.
Good evening. So we do have a tier of fee based on residential and commercial zones for use of public property. I think the question was related to how the fee that we charge right now for UOPP, use of public property permits, relates to like use of outdoor dining permits.
Specifically, the question which was posed to the council by someone who wrote to us is, should we be charging more for a use of public space that impedes a right-of-way than we do for something that's merely just there, like a parking space?
So at this time, we haven't considered that in the fees. All the use of public property permit fees are based on a temporary use, so we assume that it's, only going to be there for a temporary amount of time. So we have not looked at anything more than that.
Okay, so let me ask the city attorney, given that that hasn't been looked at, clearly we don't have the findings to justify a different fee. So could this be brought back as an amendment at some future point if we chose to give that direction?
So, Councilmember, unless PCD and Public Works want to correct me, I think that would be outside of the scope of the ordinance and the chapter that we are, that staff is presenting tonight. I think the fees would actually fall in a different provision of the code and would require separate consideration. I think staff certainly could take that as direction to consider that issue and bring something back if appropriate.
Are those fees, for instance, part of the big table of fees that we look at the annual budget process or mid-year budget process?
Yeah, so this charging of a fee for use of public right-of-way related to construction is actually something we did discuss throughout this process. However, it would require, a new fee study and what have you, in the interest of trying to move something forward to ensure that we had something to coordinate in the right-of-way. It's definitely something that's on our radar screen to pursue, and it would come back.
So without further council direction, that's something already investigation?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Then I'll go back.
Yeah, if I could just add too, because I think part of what the question was getting to is situations where we have to close the sidewalk, cut off pedestrian access. And I just wanted to say that we are trying very hard to not allow that. We are, in more cases than we used to, requiring the installation of canopies so that the pedestrian access can be maintained. So it's only in very rare situations where it's really impossible to avoid that we would allow someone to cut off pedestrian access for a lengthy period of time. So I know that doesn't get to the fee question, but we are trying to avoid that from the beginning.
Let me add in bike lanes too.
Yes, exactly.
Then my second question. Our city council operates under the constraint, it's not really a constraint to my mind, but it is legally, of Measure R passed in 1990, that we have to pass laws such that 30% of the new multifamily housing produced in Santa Monica is affordable housing. Have we looked at what this new program, which is admirable in most applications, might do to affordable housing production? We know that it's difficult sometimes for 100% affordable housing projects to get funded and done. They are on tighter margins than most projects. Was part of the study of this to look at what the impact might be on 100% affordable housing?
It was not specifically studied. However, when affordable housing projects are built within the city, they are essentially also providing pieces of a construction management plan. So when, say, for example, excavations occurring to the site, they still need to submit a plan for truck hauling routes to be approved by the traffic engineer. They still need to coordinate any closure of public right-of-way. So they're all components that are pretty much practiced. It's to formalize the submittal during plan check so that it's looked at early on.
Well,
It should not add added costs to affordable housing builder.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the last part about added costs, which is my concern.
It should not add any additional costs. These are all measures that they're already practicing in more of a piecemeal fashion.
Okay. Now, I haven't heard objections to 100% affordable housing providers, but it's good to hear from staff that your assessment is this will not add to the cost or make it more difficult to produce 100% affordable housing. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Moreno?
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I like the concept. Just a couple of questions. Our permit process can be complicated at times, and so will this fold into that process? How will it fold into the process? Will it streamline it for you guys? How are you envisioning this working within our existing guidelines?
So the construction management plan would be something that is submitted as part of the plan check submittal. And so a construction management plan would also need to be approved before the issuance of a building permit. Now, the practice of reviewing these are not new to staff. We've actually done many projects where these have been required. And I believe that we can confidently say that we've already looked at how we might be able to do a checklist format for, say, some of those projects that barely pass the threshold. So a matter of answering questions, and then also for more elaborate projects, attaching an exhibit that the builder or contractor may already have in their playbook for the construction site, and also, to communicate and look at these efforts collectively, as perhaps there may be a project, across the street from one project. It does relieve sort of later on potential issues. So this would all be happening concurrently with the review of the project documents in plan check.
Got it. Thank you. So following that then, will you have a communication piece, something that you can pick up at the counter? Will we put some effort in communicating what these new standards would be?
Yes, I believe that our format would be shared with any other application that we have on our Planning and Community Development website. It could be also when filling out the forms for a building permit request. It would be one of those forms that would be supplementing that.
Got it. Thank you. And then my last question, will this process be included in the new online permit system as one of the requirements?
It certainly has potential to be.
But not yet?
But not at the moment. We haven't crafted that and moved forward with it.
Understood. Thank you.
I'll have our building and safety representative.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. We're currently working on developing the software which mimics our Project Docs online software to coordinate a workflow for this specific process.
Great, thank you.
Very good. No other questions from council members. We can open our public hearing. We have no request to speak. So we can close our is that true still? Okay. So we can close our public hearing, and council members, this item's before us. Councilmember McEwen.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation for first reading, but first I'd like to turn to the city attorney and get those changes on the record.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. City Clerk, could I ask you to post my laptop on the screen? So the ordinance as originally presented in the agenda would have amended Santa Monica Municipal Code Section 8.08.060B simply to add the words that you will see in yellow, and I will try to zoom this even further, which is construction management plans. So adding these words would allow the building officer to require an applicant to submit such a plan in order to obtain a building permit. We simply want to take that all references to Section 8.08.060B out of the ordinance before you right now. They will come back to you later tonight when we look at the building code itself. So the amendment would be to strike all of the ordinance that has to do with that Section 8.08.060B.
Move as amended.
Second.
Motion by McEwen, second by Morena. Council members, anyone want to discuss this motion? Okay, may we have a roll call?
Councilmember Morena? Yes. Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem O'Day.
Yes, that item passes unanimously. Thank you.
Next, we have item 7B, introduction and first reading of an ordinance amending Santa Monica Municipal Code 9.64 to extend the removal of the extremely low-income affordable housing category from the Affordable Housing Production Program, and you have 3 requests to speak.
Okay, thank you. May we have our staff report?
Evening, Council. Jing Yo here to present this item. This is a request to introduce for first reading the extension of the sunset date for the elimination of the option to provide extremely low-income units pursuant to the Affordable Housing Production Program. So taking a look at why we're here tonight is for that purpose, to extend it. It sunsets November the 27th, I believe, of this year, and we'd like to have it extended till November, same date next year, 2020. We also want to provide an update as to why this is being requested. So a progress update on the AHPP feasibility study that Council directed, and then a review of some of the little preview of the changing landscape of housing, both at the regional level and at the state. So as I indicated, March of this year, Council gave direction to staff to remove the ELI option and to conduct financial feasibility analyses. So that work has been well underway with HRNA, the consultant that is doing that study, and the direction was to look at, could the HPP requirements be tweaked on the areas outside of downtown in order to more equitably produce inclusionary units across all income categories. So you can see here in March of 2019 where we were at with respect to production of housing. We thought we'd just provide that for your understanding. You can see completed in construction, that blue column, 1,760 units, and the progress that was being made towards RENA and our quantified objective. You can see here in October 2019 what has happened since that time in the 7 months. 435 units have been added in terms of have been completed or are currently in construction. You can see in our RENA we are, although you see the red there, it appears that we've overproduced per the state statutes. You don't get credit for doing more; it just counts as 0. So in terms of the RENA, we're still 428 units away from our target, and on the quantified objective is 198 units, but you can see that gray column is kind of what's coming down the line. And we have until obviously the end of 2021 to continue to work towards that number. Again, providing some context as to what has happened since this ordinance has gone into effect with that sunset date of November 2019 for the elimination of the ELI option. We have not really received a lot of mixed-use housing projects. At the time of the writing of the staff report, we hadn't seen those two projects that you see at the bottom come in. So we've had 2 housing projects submitted, one of which is 100% affordable housing. One is a Tier 2 project. We provided a little bit of background in the staff report as to how that compares to recent, in the past few years, same time period, but it's almost very hard to compare because it's not like, the regulations were the same. We had the DCP going on. So, housing providers react to, what happens with respect to city policy. So it's really hard to pull any conclusions from the effect of this change. Providing some update with respect to the feasibility study that council directed us to do. As I indicated, HRNA is really well underway with respect to developing the model for the feasibility analysis. On September 26, we held a roundtable with the development community to sort of ground truth a lot of the inputs and assumptions that go into that model. Got really, really good information, and we intend to follow up, with respect to what goes into the model. That's a big part of why we actually need more time, to ensure that all of those assumptions are okay with everybody and the chance to circle back with folks. Once that is done, we will have, you can see that the following steps, that the testing will occur and the development of the AHPP requirements for public review and comment. We do intend, as part of the project, to come back to not just the council, but to the Planning Commission and Housing Commission with a midpoint check-in with some preliminary findings, but we're just not quite there at this point. So that's reason number one why we need a little more time to complete this. Also wanted to give you a preview as to what's happening at the state and regional level. At the moment, we are cycling up. You can see here actually that the state housing bills recently signed by the governor that relate to housing legislation. You can see there, a big chunk of them go towards faster approval. So again, dealing with the process, changes to tenant protections, accessory dwelling units, funding. All of these have, potentially some impact with respect to the prototypes that we study and, that we may need to account for in the feasibility analysis. And then more importantly, at the regional level, we're gearing up for the 6-cycle housing element update, which will cover the time period from 2021 to 2029. SCAG has, been well underway. The subcommittee's been well underway on this process, based on the tool that SCAG has made available at this moment in time. And again, nothing is complete, but Santa Monica's estimate is roughly 4,800 units, divided up among the income levels. We expect January, February 2020 will be when the final methodology for determining the allocations will be announced, with next fall being the final numbers. And, so depending on what comes out of that process, we may want to have the opportunity to account for that in the feasibility analysis. As, if we're going to do this, we may as well try and do it all together as opposed to doing it twice. We were also successful in pursuing the SB2 grant, so that was about $300,000. In order to pursue incentives for housing production. You can see there some of the scope. We will be back to council on November the 12th for budget authorization with respect to that grant. Really something to consider here is, whether we should continue to proceed with the AHPP study using the existing development parameters, today's parameters basically, or should we, consider some other parameters. Again, a lot of the reason why we need this additional time. So that concludes the report, and our recommendation is that the council extend the removal of the ELI option to November of next year to provide, again, time to complete the feasibility analysis and also to see kind of how the landscape of the legislation and the RENA process plays out. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Winter?
So can you clarify, along with doing this feasibility analysis of revising the AHPP, which, if I recall correctly, is designed to sort of do what we did in the downtown plan, which is to get a more even distribution of various income levels out of the affordability requirements. we've also been talking sometime about trying to look at promoting housing development on the boulevards and the Bergamot, et cetera. So
Right.
it's a question, would that, I guess you sort of alluded to that at the end, would that AHPP study take into account those potentials for changes, since those haven't come before us yet for any sort of adoption?
Yeah, I think that's a question that we have, and that's why the recommendation is the action tonight is to ask the council
A little more time.
a little more time to provide the opportunity potentially to accommodate, some different changes.
And the development standards.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's what I thought. Okay, great, thank you.
Councilmember McEwen.
Our well-intentioned previous incentive for extremely low-income units was being gamed, and so we were ending up with not enough affordability overall. The HPP study is to enable us to, as Councilmember Winter just said, apply the more sophisticated plan that we developed for downtown to the rest of the city. So I'm a little puzzled by what you said was up for council consideration. Why would we even consider not doing the HPP study that we've already begun?
Oh, no. So we are. We've been studying, that is the crux of this feasibility analysis, is to study applying the DCP system to the boulevards, right, to the areas outside of downtown. In terms of the incentives for production, however, that's really part of the SB2 grant, so that wasn't part of this initial scope because we hadn't gotten the funding to do that yet. Based on what may come out of the RENA process, and we're, I think your guess is as good as mine as to where that kind of goes. What we're seeing preliminarily is that our allocation may be much larger across, especially at the lower income levels, and may we have to tweak some standards in order to ensure that production to meet our RENA targets.
I've been embroiled in the RENA discussions at the level of the West Side Cities Council of Governments. Mm-hmm. I can assure us all it's going to be a difficult application to make. But if you're looking for affirmation from the council that we should continue to study things, I guess I'll wait till we get to the point of a motion, but I'll certainly add that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we still have speakers from the public and our city manager.
Only to add to the context of the discussion that we're actively talking about ways in which we can give the council an opportunity to discuss this. And so whether it's a workshop, a study session with the council, or a joint meeting with the Planning Commission and the Housing Commission, and the timing of all that we're working on with staff. But we recognize that there's a lot of interest on the part of the council and the community in this issue, and so we look forward to bringing it forward to the council and appreciate planning giving you a snapshot of a process that is primarily taking place at the regional and now state level. Local communities, of which there are a couple hundred in the Southern California Association of Governments region, have a very, very limited impact on the process. That's not to say that we haven't been active and can't be active in the future, and we do have the right at some point to appeal any numbers that come down specifically for the city. But our ability to influence individual outcomes is pretty limited.
Very good. Thank you for the staff report. I'd like to open the public hearing. We have 3 speakers. If you could come join us against the wall, and Denise Barton, you can begin at the podium. Next, Jennifer Johnson, and then Linda Armstrong.
Good evening. You all sit up there and love to proclaim what diversity the city of Santa Monica has. But by this action and the tables on page 3 and 7 and 8, you will see the plan is for gentrification that you have put into place. Just look at the difference in numbers. I mean, look at the numbers of above moderate income affordable housing being produced. 902, I believe. When, as far as I know, above moderate is not even a HUD category, but yet that's where the city is putting the majority of its new moderate affordable housing. Yet you continue to target the extremely low income category, which one might have to question due to the numbers of completed or in construction does seem to be lower in September of 2019 than in March of 2019. For example, extremely low income has a difference of 17, very low income has a difference of 16, or low income has a difference of 15. In moderate income, there was a difference of -1. If you add those all up, it equals 47, which is just over 5% of the 902 above moderate affordable housing units. And here I have to question if you are misallocating funds, considering HUD doesn't exceed 100% income levels. Might that be a contributing factor to the reason the state is planning on significantly increasing the number of low-income units in all categories? And if you know that's coming, why are you not starting to work on that instead of continuing this facade, wasting money, because you know you're not making the needed numbers? Thank you.
Jennifer Johnson.
Hello, Jennifer Johnson from Harding, Larmor, Couture, and Kozel. Back in March, when Council voted to temporarily remove the extremely low income option, many of you were concerned to make this decision without having the data and information and without knowing what the potential consequences may be, which is why you limited the removal to the 8-month period and decided back in March that the removal would not be contingent on the feasibility study being complete. Instead, you decided to remove the ELI option for the 8 months, and once the 8 months was up, you would allow the ELI option to return unless you were provided with the data and information that would support making these changes to the AHPP. As you're aware, the 8 months are almost up and the feasibility study is not ready yet, and you have not been provided with that information needed to support these changes. In fact, the data seems to support the opposite. In the staff report for tonight, it originally reported that there had been 0 housing applications since the removal, and now is being reported that there were a few housing applications since it was the removal too. And for additional context, the Planning Commission is meeting tomorrow night to discuss housing policies, and in their report, they reported that less than 1/3 of the anticipated housing units have been built or under construction that were anticipated on the boulevards. And they reported, as you're aware, that in the downtown, very few, if any, new housing projects have been submitted. So if you have any concerns, I would hope that they would be outweighed by the city's need to incentivize housing, especially since they're over 2/3 behind in their anticipated housing that they need on the boulevards. It seems that some housing is better than none, especially when it comes to affordable units. So I would encourage council to follow through with your original intent and decision from March and allow the ELI removal to sunset and allow the ELI option to return until you're provided that additional information you need to make the full decision. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lynna Armstrong.
Eliminate housing for the poorest of the poor? That's a really bad idea.
Thank you for the brief comments and appreciate your input. That closes our public hearing. Council members, this item is before you for discussion. Councilmember McEwen.
I'll take it on. The reasons why we chose to do this some time ago are still the reasons why it makes sense to continue doing it now. And I mean, we heard from an attorney whose firm represents developers who have used the extra low income incentive to gain more market rate units on properties, which of course makes them more money, but has left us with too few affordable units overall. And we can't afford to keep digging that hole deeper. So this is a temporary measure that gives us a chance to do the feasibility in the Nexus to be able to legislate a much more sophisticated housing formula that will provide a mix of bedrooms, a mix of affordability. What we've been able to do downtown, we can extend to the rest of the city, and I believe we should. So I will move the staff recommendation.
Does anybody want to make
I will
a second
second
to
it,
that?
and I'll say that I understand the arguments that there's been a lull in housing applications. We cannot conjecture whether it's simply because of the elimination of the ELI option or whether it has to do with the smart money looking. We heard today that the manufacturing sector is now in recession, 2 quarters of declining growth, and there's projections pretty solid projections of recession coming around the corner. It may be that housing developers are hoping that we go into recession and some of the construction costs come down. We really have no way of knowing for sure. It's all conjecture. I do believe that we do have to look at our Prop R requirements in the long term and that we cannot just count on our housing trust fund money making up the difference between the affordable housing projection we get out of the ELI level and what we need for Prop R, because there's a limited pool of funds there. So I think that going forward, I would like us to continue with the study of the HPP and also look at the same time about new options for incentivizing housing on the boulevards and in the Bergamot area, and sort of come back with a comprehensive proposal to do both at the same time. I think that's the way we should go moving forward, so that's why I've seconded the motion.
Okay, and I'll just add, I'm troubled that we're not building enough housing. I don't know that the removal of the extremely low-income option is the reason, although if it is, then I think it's important to continue this ordinance because what we need to do is to create a better incentive to create housing than the ELI incentive was. We need to create a market opportunity for developers to build housing that meets the needs and interests of this community. So we need to take the time to do that and to do that right, and I trust our planning department is doing good work to make that happen. So I'll be supporting the motion. Councilmember Hara.
In moving forward also in maybe looking at the possibility that if we do remove it from the language at a future date, we still find a way that we can still find a place for our exceedingly low renters as well. I don't want us to, what's the phrase that I'm looking for? I don't want us that through some actions maybe jeopardize or hurt some of these residents that might still need to have some of this housing level. So I just want to make sure that we still are keeping them in mind, because 2 or 3 applicants that might have happened during the last 8 months may not be the same as when we actually get the final report. So I still want us to keep them in the forefront. So,
Councilmember Winter.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Councilmember Hara's thoughts. I totally concur with you. I think that actually what Ms. Armstrong said makes an abundance of sense. We do want to be producing this extremely low income level housing for the poorest of the poor. Very important to this town, but what we want to do at the same time is a balance of affordability levels out of the housing we produce, because we also don't want to forsake the low and very low income households that also are in need of that housing. So I know when this comes back to us, I think we'll all be in support of continuing the extremely low income option, but so with a tool that gets us all those affordability levels instead of just one.
Okay, no other council members looking to speak, so we have a motion before us, and could we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Hara?
yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Moreno?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem O'Day.
Yes, that item passes unanimously.
Next, we have item 8A, review of master plan layout and park program for renovation and expansion of Memorial Park, and you have 11 speakers.
Thank you, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, council members. Karen Ginsberg, Director of Community and Cultural Services. Okay, sorry about that. I thought I'd start this evening to give you a little bit of context about the city's parks and where Memorial Park fits into that context. Santa Monica's park system includes 32 parks encompassing over 130 acres. Within the parks network, there are small neighborhood parks and larger community parks such as Clover, Virginia Avenue, and Memorial. Each park provides amenities that as a network form a rich array of opportunities for various sports, play experiences, gardening, picnicking, walking, and relaxing. Many of our parks feature community buildings that serve as home to a variety of recreational classes and provide places for meetings and other gatherings. Memorial Park, as noted on the map before you, was established in the 1950s and is geographically located in the center of the city. It is important to the overall parks network as a key park that serves baseball and softball needs for youth and adults and is home to the only public gymnasium and skate park in Santa Monica. Within its existing 10.3 acres, the park includes 6 fields serving baseball and softball, with 4 of those fields that have overlapping outfields, which limits their playability. A skate park that was built in 2005 in response to community need, 4 tennis courts that in the last several years have been striped to accommodate pickleball, a growing sport in the community, a small children's playground adjacent to the 79-space surface parking lot, restrooms and concession building within the park, and the existing buildings at the southwest corner of the park provide a home for the Santa Monica Police Activities League, community meeting rooms, a fitness room, staff offices, and the Memorial Park Gymnasium. Needless to say, this 10.3 acres is very active. In 2004, the city acquired the former Fisher lumber site adjacent to the park to the north, and with the intent to expand Memorial Park by approximately 2.9 acres, resulting in a 13-acre park. In 2016, the council selected the expansion of Memorial Park as one of the city's high priority projects to be incorporated into the LA County-wide Parks Needs Assessment that was being done by the county at that time. In 2018, the council awarded a contract to Abe Landscape Architects following a procurement process to prepare a feasibility study and master plan with the goals of maximizing opportunities for fields with a focus on diamond sports, considering the community programs in the buildings, integrating a buffer around the park's perimeter and incorporating actions from the pedestrian and bike action plans, and giving consideration to the park's relationship to its surroundings and within the broader park system and city context. Beginning with focus groups in 2018, the community participated in a multifaceted community engagement process. We led a series of focus groups reaching 95 park users, including participants at the skate park, gymnasium, PAL, field permit holders, Field Sports Advisory Council, SMC and SMUSD staff, and city staff as well. These focus group participants shared their thoughts about the existing park and their ideas for the vision and expansion. An online survey for the project was launched in April 2018 and available to the public through June 2018. During that time, 608 respondents participated, with more than 70% being from zip codes immediately near the park. Key findings from this online survey demonstrated that most people drive to the park, that they visit at least once per week, that sports activities are the most popular, with 40% of the respondents advocating for improvements to the sports facilities. And these respondents also mentioned safety concerns regarding the restrooms, and then parking was identified as a challenge by a little over half of the respondents. 155 participants came to Workshop 1, which was held in May 2018. At this workshop, the consultant team presented the findings that they had gathered to date, and including the online survey, and they received input from the participants at this meeting. The input received validated many of the survey responses. On August 13th, 2018, we held the second community workshop, where 3 options for the master plan were presented for input. 170 participants reviewed these options, and each of the options showed 6 fields with alternative locations for the community building, parking, and tennis. That's the major differences between these options. Overwhelmingly, attendees expressed a desire for additional fields than what was shown in any of these options. Other elements that participants voiced support for included the central hub, tennis and pickleball over parking, the expansion of the skate park, and an incorporation of a walking loop with exercise stations. Hearing the request for more fields, the design team re-examined the site, met with field users in a working session to examine options, and at that meeting we moved diagrammatic puzzle pieces around to figure out how best to locate and meet the needs. And this led to the proposed master plan that's before you this evening. The plan was presented to the community in June, both online and at an informational booth at the park, and subsequently to the Field Sports Advisory Council, the Recreation and Parks Commission, and to the Urban Forest Task Force. Now I would like to introduce Senior Architect Amelia Feichner to present the proposed master plan.
Good evening. So following the community workshop 2, the design team revised the conceptual layouts to incorporate the feedback received and created a revised master plan organized around a central community hub with a focus on creating generous pathways through the park and enhancing the park's connection to the surrounding neighborhood. The community hub will be a gathering area for all park users. Located in the central heart of the park, it includes a large shaded children's play area adjacent to new park restrooms, concessions, park storage, and an office for field monitoring staff to serve the entire park and enhance park use by the community overall. The opportunity for open space, benches, and picnic areas along with its central location make this the active center of the park. Generous 20-foot wide pedestrian promenades within the park act as an extension of the neighborhood pedestrian network, connect to the community hub, and provide open space and amenities for community use. Organized around the community hub and pedestrian promenades, the master plan includes the following key features: 7 diamond sports fields that will allow for more simultaneous games, covered on-site parking totaling approximately 128 spaces designated for park users with a drop-off and turnaround area off of 14th Street. 4 tennis courts striped for pickleball are located over the surface parking lot, an expansion of the Cove Skate Park, and a new expanded community recreation center at the southwest corner of the site where the gymnasium, PAL building, and community meeting rooms currently exist. The master plan layout also includes a community fitness trail with exercise stations, a Class 1 bike path, and although it's not shown in this plan right here, an off-leash dog run similar to the one that exists in the park today will be incorporated into the design of the project. The 4 combination fields to the north of the park utilize synthetic turf to create adaptable play space for baseball and softball groups of all ages. The 3 natural turf fields located at the southeast corner of the park will be dedicated to youth diamond sports. Each of the combo fields could accommodate a single regulation high school baseball game, an adult softball game, or a collegiate softball game. Additionally, each combo field can be divided with temporary fencing. Those are the white curved lines you see there in the outfield, to accommodate 2 youth baseball or 2 youth fast pitch softball games played simultaneously. Dugout, shared spectator seating, batting cages, and LED sports lights are also included. The youth baseball and youth fast pitch softball fields are natural grass with skinned infield baseline sized specifically for Little League Baseball and youth fast pitch softball respectively. These fields have all the amenities of a first-class facility, including covered dugouts, batting cages, electronic scoreboards, shared spectator seating, and LED field lighting. In this master plan, the footprint of Memorial Park will be expanded into portions of 16th Street and Colorado Avenue to accommodate the park program, resulting in a reduction of 37 metered street parking spaces adjacent to the park. The covered parking lot will increase on-site parking inventory by 49 spaces for, again, a total of about 128 spaces specifically for park users. 4 tennis courts, striped for pickleball, will be elevated over the new on-site surface parking lot and include stairs and an elevator for ease of access. LED sports lighting, wide perimeter clearance spaces, and dedicated equipment storage immediately adjacent to the play areas are included. An expansion of the existing Cove Skate Park will provide an opportunity to update the park's existing elements and add other modern features and amenities, such as additional shade for spectators. And the Community Recreation Center would integrate the existing functions of the gymnasium, PAL building, community rooms, and staff offices into one facility. It will be designed to enhance existing uses and support a broad array of recreational and community programs and services, a larger gymnasium, and increased storage space. For those who prefer to walk or bike to Memorial Park, the proposed master plan includes 4-foot wide planter areas that will provide a buffer between generous 8-foot sidewalks and field activities within the park. The community fitness trail will be a dedicated half-mile walking loop with a series of interspersed or grouped exercise stations. The path will travel the park's perimeter on 14th Street, Colorado 16th, and then traverse the park's interior and connect to the centrally located community hub. Street trees and parkway planters will create a sense of comfort for pedestrians walking along the street, and a shared-use bike path completely separated from the street will allow for future connections to the Exposition Corridor bike path and intersections with bikeways on 14th and 17th. The master plan envisions a 3-phased approach that would be implemented over time as funding is available. Phase 1, shown here, includes the community hub consisting of the playground, concessions, restrooms, storage, and field monitoring office, the combo fields to the north, the covered parking lot with elevated tennis and pickleball courts, and a temporary natural turf practice field there to the east. This phase is estimated to cost approximately $25 to $30 million in capital costs. That includes the cost of both design and construction, and involve roughly 18 to 24 months of construction that would be staged to minimize disruption of the existing park uses. Due to funding limitations, perimeter streetscape improvements would be included in Phase 2. If streetscape improvements were to be added to Phase 1, they would increase the capital cost by approximately $4 million. Phase 2 includes the perimeter streetscape, 2 natural turf youth baseball fields to the east, the natural turf youth fast-pitch softball field to the south, the community walking loop with exercise stations, and the expansion of the Cove Skate Park. This phase would cost about approximately $15 to $18 million in capital costs and involve roughly 12 to 18 months of construction that, again, would be staged to minimize disruptions of existing park use. Phase 3 includes the construction of the Community Recreation Center to replace the existing buildings at the southwest corner of the site. It's estimated to cost approximately $60 to $68 million in capital costs and involve roughly 24 to 30 months of construction. As mentioned, the master plan was presented to the Recreation and Parks Commission at their meeting on July 18th. During public input at this meeting, representatives from the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Monica expressed their interest in building and operating a new main branch facility at Memorial Park and presented this preliminary test fit plan. The commission was not in a position at the time to recommend inclusion of the new branch as part of the master plan and was unsure whether the club should be in the park given heavy use of the park already. The general concerns that were raised by the commission included that it is rather late in the planning process to add this facility to the project. There were concerns about parking impacts, which are already a challenge. This is that if this proposal was to be considered, the community would certainly need an opportunity to weigh in through a public outreach process. The importance of maintaining the tennis and pickleball courts, which were not reflected in the plan presented, and the construction estimates that were presented by the club seemed unrealistic and did not include the cost of underground parking that would be needed to accommodate both park and club users. Since the meeting, city staff have met with representatives from the Boys and Girls Club to discuss their proposal in more detail and to discuss additional opportunities for collaboration between the club and city programs at PAL and Virginia Park. These conversations about programmatic alignment are ongoing. The master plan was unanimously supported by the Recreation and Parks Commission with this list of recommendations. Since July, staff has explored how the master plan can adjust the recommendations and will work with the selected design build team to consider and incorporate these into design and implementation. Following this evening's review of the master plan, and if directed to proceed, staff will issue a request for bids to provide design and pre-construction services for phases 1 and 2 of the master plan. Staff will return to council by January 2020 for approval to negotiate an agreement with the selected design build team. Approximately $5.08 million have been identified in the CIP budget for the design and pre-construction services for Memorial Park. Also, council previously authorized a contract with Wood Environmental and Infrastructure Solutions for environmental consulting services related to the Memorial Park Neighborhood Plan. Services related to the Memorial Park redevelopment and expansion were not included in the scope of work at the time. However, upon authorization to negotiate and execute a fourth modification to this agreement, staff would work with Wood in preparation of the environmental impact report or analysis, and the complete analysis will be presented to the City Council for certification prior to approving full design and construction of phase 1 of the project. And finally, in 2016, Santa Monica voters passed Measure V, a Santa Monica College bond measure that included $20 million in funding for construction of phase 1 of the Memorial Park expansion project. Staff is also working with Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District to identify additional construction funding for phase 1 of the project from Measure SMS bonds. Authorization is requested from the council to enable the city manager to negotiate these agreements. Staff would return to council with funding and use agreements with SMC and Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. Staff will also continue to pursue other possible funding, including grant opportunities to support the construction and implementation of this project. This concludes our staff report this evening. We are available for questions.
We have some. Thank you.
Great.
Councilmember Winter.
So, among the many groups who went out in terms of the public process, one was FSAC, the Field Sports Advisory Council, which is comprised of people who are advocates not only for diamond sports, but other types of sports, soccer, rugby, lacrosse, etc. So what was their feedback? Was there any pushback that maybe there should be a different type of field here? Are they satisfied with the fact that there's a new multi-purpose field going across the street will meet the demand of the other sports? Or
They were supportive of the proposed master plan as a group, and actually made a recommendation that was forwarded to the Recreation and Parks Commission because they're advisory to the commission to that end.
Okay, and then obviously at the end of the presentation there was mention of the college bond money. How much of this plan has been vetted by people from the college?
So we've had some preliminary discussions with members of the college administration and have a meeting scheduled with them in early November, I think, formal meeting with them in early November.
Because that would be somewhat important, I would think.
It's very important.
Yeah. So they might have different thoughts about what type of dimensions of fields are being included based on their demands?
We've been in discussions with them and feel pretty assured that we'll be able to accommodate their NCAA requirements on the combo field to accommodate women's softball. The other sport that they continue to want to use Memorial Park for is classes and competitive tennis. So tennis classes and their tennis team.
And to that extent, if you stripe a tennis court for pickleball, you can still play tennis on it without getting completely baffled by all the different lines.
They've been doing it now for several years at Memorial Park.
We've tested that.
Yes.
And then sort of the big question, is we also have in the works at some point in our lifetimes the long aborting Memorial Park plan that PCD is working on, right? And how much of a dialogue has there been between the two departments about what they anticipate, how the surrounding area might integrate into this proposed park plan? Oh, look, Mr. Martin's here.
Planning director.
Yes, we certainly do have the Memorial Park plan on our to-do list. It's fairly low down the list of priorities that was reviewed by the council a couple of years ago. However, we don't at this time anticipate that there would be much in the way of increase in permitted housing at that location. It is a mixed-use boulevard low. It is one of the few areas in the city where we still have Tier 3 available through a development agreement process. And then also it is actually the only area where we have the activity overlay still in place. So if you add all those things together, the Tier 3 and the activity overlay, you can get to a 2.75 FAR and a 57-foot height, which is fairly tall for this area. So we don't think that we would actually see an increase in height or change in development standards through the planning process. What we would be looking at is design standards, connections, street improvements, those types of things are basically what we'd be focused on.
But we had hoped to get some sort of housing production out of that, correct?
Yes, and again, it's among the highest outside of the downtown. If you were to add all the the Tier 3 and the activity zone overlay, you would get to a fairly substantially high 57-foot number. Currently, under the standards, those are only available through the development agreement process. So one of the things we would look at is could we unlock those opportunities through a development review permit or some other process so that it doesn't actually require a development agreement.
So I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is sort of the conflict between identifying this as a citywide sports facility and then potentially in the future developing housing around something that might also function as a community park, right? So unless we're intending to build housing only for people who really enjoy diamond sports, has anybody talked about this, about whether there needs to be some passive recreation space in there, place where people might live next door to go throw a ball? I mean, and again, it gets the, what do we anticipate about the permitting process? At Lincoln, we've been very successful in sort of balancing permitted sports use with people in the neighborhood being able to go over there and use it. Like you and Christ totally died down because we've done that very well. Do you think we'd be able to do that here?
That's the intent. We would like to provide opportunities for the neighborhood to come out and play on the synthetic turf combo fields, particularly. In phase 1, the practice field is a grass field along 16th Street, and that is another area for the community. I would really like to call your attention to the central hub. That playground will probably be at least twice, if not 2.5 times bigger than the current playground that's stuck against the parking lot and probably not very conducive. And the central walkways provide an opportunity through design to talk about some of the things that Amelia mentioned, picnic tables, potentially shaded areas, other seating, and they're 20 feet wide, which is pretty generous. I think the intent is really to lift this park up, recognizing that not every park in Santa Monica can provide everything to one neighborhood, but it is a system, and we are 8 square miles.
All right, thank you. And then I have a question for the city manager. So, as you're aware, in the audit subcommittee, we've had some feedback from Moss Adams about potentially having them vet some of our construction contracts, and we're talking about possible new design build process here. Would we potentially get them involved in that process?
Potentially. I guess why don't you answer it?
Wasn't asked.
Yeah, just keep putting words in his mouth. I mean.
Thank you for the opportunity. The audit subcommittee has identified this as one of the 4 priority projects for this year for Moss Adams. They've selected 2 construction contracts, and I am going to turn to my colleagues in Public Works. I believe one is the SWIP, and the second one is the City Services Building.
Okay.
So that part of the scope of work has already been taken up by a particular project now that we can benefit from, but we can, as the city manager said, we can look at for the next round of audits what we might be able to do with their assistance to, in addition to value engineering, which we always do, but find additional ways to be efficient and effective with their help.
Great, thank you.
And just to be clear, tonight we're not authorizing construction.
I know that.
Okay.
I'm just thinking ahead.
Master planning, as it were. Councilmember Hara.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So I wanted to actually give you major props on the presentation that you gave to us in regarding to the response of the survey and the way that you presented it to us on who, from what zip codes they came. So I was wondering if it was possible for you to give us a rough estimate also of the people that actually participated in these workshops. Do you have a breakdown as well, more or less?
I don't have a breakdown of their zip codes from the workshop participants. I know that while we may have had repeat visitors, we had 155 at the first workshop and 170 participants at the second workshop, which I think is a pretty good turnout in both cases. The first workshop was held at Memorial Park, so it drew people who were already there, exercising or maybe playing or practicing. We had a bunch of young people that participated that evening. And then the second workshop, unfortunately, we couldn't do it at Memorial Park. It was at the East Wing of the Civic, and we still had 170 people come.
Which is actually really incredible. I'm really happy to hear you mention that you had some youth participating in the workshops. I think that's really important because that also empowers them to be able to tell us what it is that they would like to see. I think that was all that I was really looking for. During these workshops and even at the with the survey responses, was there ever did anybody bring up anything about having something other than the Diamonds sports at the park?
There were, at the workshops and most likely through the online survey as well, the skate park users are a very active group of users who, yes, that is their sport, but there were a whole group of skate park users that participated in the workshop and advocated for the skate park in particular.
Was there anything else other than the skate park?
I think, as I mentioned, people who participated liked what they saw. We had tennis and pickleball advocates that were there who advocated for their various sports. I think they came to realize that combining the use seemed to work. At first they were advocating for separate courts for everything, but again, this will be a 13-acre park that's pretty jam-packed.
And there is something else that I noticed in kind of reviewing and reading some of the notes and the responses. They were really concerned about the safety of where the restrooms were. How much did we take that into consideration, and how did we go about placing it so that way it would be better?
So that was a big consideration. Part of why we wanted to locate it in this community hub was because of the other uses that would be there. A field monitoring space, concessions that would be active, the playground that would be right there, and the restrooms sort of in a compilation of uses and centrally located within the park. Right now, the restrooms, while they're on a main path through the park, they're separated from those types of uses. The playground's by the parking lot, the concession building is on 16th Street, and it's sort of by itself in the middle of the park.
Okay, thank you so much.
Councilmember Marina.
Thanks for the presentation. I just have a few questions for you. I've heard from a number of basketball playing advocates. I know we have a number of courts that are inside, and I know we have other courts in the neighborhood, Clover Park, etc. Have you ever taken an inventory of how many basketball courts, how many baseball diamonds, etc.?
Yes.
And where do we fall in that list and adding to these?
So we have outdoor basketball courts at 9 city parks.
Okay.
We also have them, or the school district has them at many of the schools, including Santa Monica High School on its property. We have fields, and let me pull that information because it's very detailed. We have fields at Memorial Park, Clover Park, Marine Park, Gandara Park, and Los Amigos Park. And then those are diamond fields. And then we have multi-purpose fields at Airport Park, Clover Park, Gandara Park, and Marine Park. And it gets a little complicated because sometimes these multi-purpose fields serve for different sports at different times of the year. So at Clover Park, which are all grass, and you're probably familiar with it, big, wide, open spaces that might have a baseball diamond or 2 baseball diamonds or softball diamonds, are used for soccer at all times of the year. So they have dual purpose. When they're in baseball use, there's temporary fencing that goes out for the outfield fence that gets installed in the spring, and they're multi-purpose. In a city the size of Santa Monica with 32 parks, we don't have the luxury of a ton of acreage. The other thing I would mention is that Memorial Park is the 3rd largest park acreage-wise in the city.
Okay, good. That's helpful. Thank you. Parking seems to be somewhat of a concern, and if we build it, they will come.
Right.
So how do we accommodate all of the added visitors to this great park?
So as Amelia said, the master plan proposes to increase the on-site parking to 128 spaces. Right now it's 79 spaces. So that's a significant increase. Our park parking lots are intended for park use only. They're signed that way. It does take enforcement to regulate it because, people will try to park there because it's free. But we do a pretty good job of working with our public safety, police department, and traffic services if we need to stripe tires, if there's an extreme condition. But yes, parking is challenging. And I think one of our goals is to extend the bike path along Colorado, make it a little safer for people to come from the Expo light rail. You have other bike connections, on 17th Street, and 14th Street now is green. And so hopefully people who don't have to lug giant bags of baseball equipment might consider getting to the park in a different way.
Sense. You bring up the point of enforcement. Will there be a CSO substation or some place where they can hunker down?
At this point, there's no dedicated substation at the park. There is an office planned in the hub for the field monitoring staff that could be potentially shared if that were something that could be funded.
Got it. Okay. And then the last, most difficult question, 16th Street, which is not very well used. We share it, I know, with the school district. How, if we considered to close the street or take some part of the street back as parking, dog run, etc., how would that work where we are currently in the development process?
I'll try, but may turn to my public works staff. My understanding is 16th Street is a vacated street, and get the terminology correct. As part of the master plan in phase 2, we intend to remove some portion of that angled parking that's there now in order to provide enough space for the Little League field to fit along 16th Street in phase 2. So that's the beginning of sort of taking a bit of the street. I think in the interim, there's certainly opportunities to use that street during special events or other types of things that might happen at the park for food trucks or other types of amenities. Maybe there's a sign-up table or whatever. It is a vacated street. I think in order to close that street and add it to the park, it would be a process that we would have to examine, probably working with the city attorney's office to see what the legal ramifications are, because the properties on the other side of the street have some rights to that street. Not only the school district, but there's another privately owned property that's closer to Colorado.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
And I have a couple questions. I want to dig in a little deeper on how the permits work at the park and what it's like for just regular public access. You may know I live really close to the park, and it's hard to just get onto the fields to throw a ball, to kick a ball, to throw a frisbee, whatever. And as we expand the use there for the diamonds, I'm really concerned that it becomes even less accessible to people. How can we better manage what we're doing with these fields?
So I think what we probably would need to do is look at the permit time, right? So the block of time that permits are issued, and block out through a permit, so actually issue ourselves a permit, for lack of a better way to do it, for public use time. And then have field monitoring staff that would either be stationed at the park or part of their rotation, because our staff go to various parks, to be there so that the space is actually used just to kick a ball around or hit a ball or play catch or whatever. That is how we are handling Lincoln Middle School right now, and I think it's going pretty well.
It's going okay, but I had a couple of kids squeeze through the fence to try to get in there to play some basketball. It's pretty hard to get into Lincoln, and it's often empty. And the same is true with Memorial. It's often just sitting there empty. I'm not so concerned about when the baseball games are playing. I love seeing the baseball games there. That's fun, right? Like, we want to go and sit and be part of that community. But we can't get on the field half the time, and they're totally empty. So why is it like that? What can we do better?
So I'm actually surprised that you're saying that. I understand for the Little League fields, which are sort of precious, if they are fenced and they are only for permitting. But the fields that are on the current fields that are on the north side, you can walk right on. There's no gates or locks on those fields.
Well, they're frequently locked, but they are more open certainly than the southern ones. Mm-hmm. As I look at this design too, I'm thinking about how we're opening up and on this question of access, right? So one is sort of how we use the space, and two is what we're putting in place in the new plan that either makes it look open or makes it look not open. And what I'm seeing is a lot of big fencing for a lot of big new fields, a new parking structure, and a hardening of the elements. Do we have renderings to give us a sense for what this will really feel like at the pedestrian scale and how it kind of feels inviting and opening?
Can you pull up maybe So this is the central hub. I think one of the other the street rendering, perhaps. Yeah. So the intent from this rendering, and again, it's a rendering, so it's not at a fully designed level, but the intent is to really open these generous sidewalks. So even though there definitely have to be fences for protection for these fields, there's landscape, buffering. Right now, there's very little of that in this park, and the idea is so people feel like, and sort of the seat wall potentially that leads you into the park, signage that is prominent that leads you into the park, and other things like that.
Okay, and this is in the middle of the block on the south
This
side
is
of the park
on
at Lincoln.
Colorado Avenue, at the sort of center of the block, because the master plan has sort of two axes for this, for these walkways that land at the hub. And then
This is the Colorado side. So
yeah.
we're standing on the train tracks? Okay.
Looking at it from standing on the train tracks. Hopefully you're standing on the sidewalk.
Well, yeah. All right. Well, could I ask Mr. Martin to come back up for a moment? Thanks. You described the allowances in the loose and how we've kind of thought about this area as sort of a pretty big envelope for building compared to what else is available in the city. And I think Councilmember Winter rightly pointed out that we were contemplating housing with that envelope. What I wasn't clear on is what we can do to actually get that housing. Like, why is it not working? Is this part of where we're having trouble, and as we talked about earlier tonight already, in getting housing in some of our other areas, like the boulevards that we designated?
Yeah.
In passing by tonight, I noticed that there's a creative office redevelopment. It's an adaptive reuse on a property directly across the street on the southeast corner, 16th and Olympic, northeast corner, but southeast of this project. And so we're not getting there yet.
Right.
Can we?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, what we're seeing more in the area is either applications for creative office uses or just by right conversions of existing buildings to creative office. But I think what we can do is we could look at the tier system that was developed through the loose. Currently tier 2 allows a 1.75 FAR and 36 feet. If you want to go beyond that, you're into a development agreement situation. And we know that that's a difficult process. It's time consuming. It's very uncertain. So we could unlock that tier 3, which gets you up to a 2.0 FAR and 47 feet by changing the entitlement process for that height and FAR and putting it back into the zoning ordinance. Because what happened when the zoning ordinance was adopted in 2015 is it doesn't have the tier 3 because it's only available through a DA, and so it's only based on what's allowed in the loose. Then you could go further and also take what's possible under the activity zone overlay, which again gets you up to 2.75 FAR and 57 feet, and make that an easier process because currently, again, you'd have to do a development agreement. So the only way to go beyond the tier 2 is through a DA, and it might just be that when developers look at that, they decide that for a housing project, the 1.75, 3 stories, it doesn't pencil, but it's not worth, or they don't think it's, there's not enough certainty to enter into a development agreement process to get to that higher height in FAR.
Right.
So I think what we would look at is, as part of looking at the boulevards and looking at Bergamot, to see how can we incentivize housing, making it an easier process, make it a more certain process. We could do the same thing here and hopefully get to those heights.
And really what we're talking about is Snyder Diamond, Tacos Por Favor, the school district, and now we just lost this one low-slung office space?
Yeah, it's the activity center is it doesn't include the south side of Olympic,
doesn't,
so it wouldn't look at Taco Sport Favor, but it includes the areas to the east, north, and west, the frontages across from the park.
And as far as connectivity, which you described too in your response to Councilmember Winter's questions, I mean, this view, for example, here, there's no possibility of a crossing of the train tracks there, right? On the south side, similarly, knowing this backbone cuts through the entire project, it bisects the block, we wouldn't have a crosswalk in the middle of the block at Olympic Boulevard, I would imagine, right?
It's not anticipated at this point. I mean, it's something that could be looked at. And it would be harder on Colorado, obviously, because of the tracks.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
We have no other council members asking questions. Let's open up the public hearing. We have a number of members of the public ready to speak on this plan. So let's start with Marianne LaGuardia. What do we have here? We have a chair report by the vice chair of our commission and some folks you are bringing up with you, like Laura Lee Ash. Is that what it is, or are you dedicating time? And Chris Knopf. Okay, come on in and give us the chair report. Thank you.
Good evening. Different sports park, same person. I've been, let's say the job of reporting what the Recreation and Parks Commission thinks of this has been designated to me as the vice chair. And as the staff report indicates quite clearly, the Recreation and Parks Commission voted unanimously to support this plan and get going on phase one. The general feeling was this has been long promised. I know promised is a loose word, but that the rectangular field sports have been pushier about getting help than perhaps the diamond field sports, and council itself did say that that was a priority with respect to this park. The Recreation and Parks Commission was impressed with how responsive the design process was to the needs of the community. These were very well attended meetings by people ranging from drop-ins to people who had an axe to grind to people who just had a general interest in parks and sports. And as was explained, there was a significant shift from the original design to the final design, or the design that we've supported, in response to the community's desire for more fields, for open fields in the sense of the combination fields, that there would be able to be more games going on, that the fields were not exclusively assigned to any one sport or any one entity. And to the open space element, you can only cram so much into one park. And even though this one is a big one getting bigger, it still doesn't have enough for everyone or every desire that everyone had. And so the one change that the community seemed to want and Recreation and Parks thoroughly supported was putting in a dog run. The park provides not just for sports, and I understand that that's a concern, but it also provides for pedestrian access. It provides currently for recreational equipment interspersed through the path, and there was a recommendation, a strong recommendation from Recreation and Parks, which is included in the sports recommendation, that equipment actually go in clustered places, because the studies show that it's used more if there are 2 or 4 or more pieces of equipment together than if they're just single things. And that saves a little space for dogs or wider sidewalks or something. With respect to Mayor Pro Tem O'Day's questions about FSAC, I can also speak to that. Oh, I'm sorry, Ted. Somebody cared about FSAC, come on. FSAC enthusiastically supports this plan. They enthusiastically support the addition of more diamond sports fields and better diamond sports fields, and because they understand that people who come to youth sports events bring their other children, bring grandparents, and bring so on. The idea of more things going on in the park in a more organized manner, such as this central hub, will be great. I would direct your attention to page 20 of the staff report, which lists the things that the Recreation and Parks Commission has asked be considered, and not just considered, because that's kind of a weenie word, strongly considered in the design process, and most of those are on the staff report list. One is making sure that the fields are the right size for multiple use, including the right size for, say, high school or college games. Keeping the dog run, dealing with parking, which is a problem everywhere in town. At least they're adding spaces here, and the drop-off area will make a huge improvement in this park. Analyzing the tree canopy, which I really don't know a whole lot about, except I'd hate to see any trees disappear, and moving trees that can be moved instead of just slaying them. Examining the sun and shade effects on field sports, since apparently the way fields are pointed affects the ability of the game to be played as it should be. There was strong support for reconsidering artificial turf versus grass. I think ultimately there was a compromise with maintaining 3 of the fields with natural grass, and the information that was presented by the experts was that the multi-use fields or the multiple use fields will fare better with
Very nice
turf.
presentation. Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah. So I figured it out. Laura Lee Ash, you're up next, and you are in a priority along with Chris Knopf because you selected to speak for 1 minute. Thanks for observing the new council rules and earning your priority. Next, after that, we'll have Michael Kadish.
It's better than a fast pass at Disneyland.
That's right.
Good evening. I'm Laura Lee Asher, resident of Santa Monica for over 42 years, former Santa Monica Police Department employee and Police Activities League supporter and board member. I'm before you tonight to request that you vote in favor of moving forward with the Memorial Park Master Plan as presented. Our community has already waited a very long time for the changes to Memorial Park to come to fruition. There's a definite need for more field space, especially for diamond sports. Speaking to the needs of the Police Activities League, our 26-year-old building is in need of expansion and updating to better accommodate the youth of our city who attend PAL programs. After many years of waiting for a viable plan, I urge you all to move this matter forward without further delays. Our fellow residents, which include the youth of our community, are counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Knopf, who will be followed by Michael Kadish and then Daniel Campbell.
Good evening. Good to be back before you. Christopher Knopf of Sunset Park, formerly of the Disabilities Commission, and for the last 5 years, board member of the Santa Monica Girls Fast Pitch League. I'm here requested by our board to report to you that our group is extremely excited about this plan. We urge you to pass and implement and move forward the plan that's before you. We have a very serious field space problem, particularly that particularly affects our league and our girls. We have 300 girls, translates to 500 to 600 family members, including youth umpires that we train, and we are fighting for field space all the time. And so these additional fields are essential for us. We don't have to cram games in. We don't have to play into the evening hours for these young girls. And we are very much in favor of the feature stadiums for both our younger girls as well as the college age girls. And we hope to be on a par level with the boys as well. So thanks so
Chris.
much.
That's a good fast pitch.
Appreciate it.
It's too easy. Michael Kadish.
Councilmember McEwen left.
I know. He's the only one I really said it for.
Good evening and thank you. My name is Michael Kadish. I'm a resident and business owner here in Santa Monica. I'm also a member of the board of directors of Santa Monica Little League, currently serving as its field operations manager. Each year, Santa Monica Little League has boys and girls ages 5 through 13 using its facilities and registering more than 800 players in its spring and fall baseball seasons. We are fully supportive of the plan and the project and the efforts city staff has made to include all stakeholders in the design process. The proposed plan improves access, safety, and security of all users, including its youngest baseball players. It allows us to showcase the city, to host destination for Little League World Series competitions, girls fast pitch softball, and adult softball tournaments. In short, we are supportive of the plan and urge the council to move forward as recommended by the city.
Thank you. Daniel Campbell, who will be followed by Khalees Lindsay and Tom Larmore.
Hello, Council. First, thanks for the time to speak. Appreciate it. My name is Daniel Campbell. I'm a resident of Santa Monica. I'm also a board member of the Santa Monica Pony Baseball group, and I sit on the FSAC committee too. I'm here to advocate for the board to move on the Memorial Park plan, and I'd like to give you a couple of reasons why. First, with the explosion of youth sports in general in our city, the field space demands have been ever growing. Number two, with the explosion of adult sports programs in the city, those demands have further exacerbated the problem, especially for diamond sports. Number three, I believe adding another 60-90 field or an MLB regulation size field to our city will help keep the best players that we have in the city from leaving. A lot of the kids seem to exodus from the city because they don't have a place to play and end up in the Valley, Orange County, South Bay, Inland Empire to try and get to the next level of play. I would say that's the same for girls fast pitch, and a big advocate of including another 50-70 field for the girls fast pitch. Finally, I'd like to say, I love baseball, and I hope, in our small way, and in my small way, to, help instill the wonder and excitement, the sportsmanship that I grew up with as a kid. And all of you here on this council can help in that endeavor. Thanks again for your time, and I appreciate your consideration. Any questions?
No, thank you very much. Khalees Lindsay.
Good evening. My name is Khalees Lindsay, and I am a retired Santa Monica Police Lieutenant. I am also the current president of the Santa Monica Police Activities League's Board of Directors. PAL has been a long-time provider of free after-school programs for the Santa Monica youth ages 6 to 17. Over 70% of the youth that participate in PAL's programs are residents of this community, with many of them living in the Pico neighborhood. PAL was built in 1993, and its primary focus was to be a delinquency prevention and intervention program to address the increase in gang-related incidents and juvenile arrests. PAL was intentionally placed in Memorial Park because it was centralized and highly accessible for youth, particularly those living in the Pico neighborhood. Fast forward 26 years, PAL's programming has flourished and expanded, causing youth enrollment to significantly increase. While the structure of the PAL building has remained the same since 1993, through its fundraising efforts, the PAL board has helped with some interior updates by repairing and replacing much equipment and furniture, but PAL's desired need to have a new facility with larger rooms for its educational, leadership, and recreational programming, as well as equipment storage. I speak on behalf of the PAL Board of Directors in support of the Memorial Park Master Plan as presented. It incorporates the highly desired and much-needed expansion of all fields, skate park, as well as newly constructed community recreation center, which will house PAL. Thank you all.
Thank you. Tom Larmore, and you'll be followed by Rodney Leiber, Mike Feinstein, and Linda Armstrong.
Good evening. I'm speaking as the Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the Santa Monica Boys and Girls Club. The club, as you probably know, has been serving youth of our community for 75 years, and we currently serve over 4,000 children between the ages of 6 and 18 from multiple locations, including the main branch facility that we have on Lincoln Boulevard. Recently, the board has been considering the possible replacement of that facility and possibly relocation because the building is over 60 years old. It's in need of a fair amount of work and isn't really configured in a way that is ideally suited for the programs that we run today. Also, we are sitting on some pretty valuable land that could be used for housing if it were not occupied by the Boys and Girls Club. And that gives us the opportunity to raise some funds to pay for construction of a new main branch facility in some location. We looked particularly at somewhere in the area of Memorial Park because that will allow us to better serve our members, given what the demographics are. And when we became aware of the new master plan for Memorial Park, we indicated an interest in being a part of that park. We've expressed that on several occasions over the last year and a half. And we believe that a proposal that is kind of consistent with what we do at JAMS, which is a situation in which the school district leases us the land that we occupy for our facility there, and for $1 a year. We built the building at our cost. We operate the programs at our cost. And that's the kind of idea that we had for Memorial Park. We think that a Boys and Girls Club facility there would enhance the park in a variety of ways, and we urge you to consider requesting that the staff consider that as part of the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Larmore. Rodney Leiber?
Hi there. I'm Rodney Leiber. I own 50,000 square feet across the street, just north of the park, across the tracks. I manage creative office space. I've been there for about a dozen years or so, and happily in support of this park and the imminent improvements. I was wondering if I could go off clock for a second to answer and elaborate on David's answers to your questions about housing and
You're still on the clock, but go for it.
Okay. Well, let me say what I wanted to say, what I came to. I'm very in support of the park. I'm right across the street. The improvements are long coming. The one thing, the city architects have done a great job, immersive. They met with me. They adopted one of my suggestions, which I'm very happy about. One thing that didn't come up during my meetings was eliminating parking, which I think is a very questionable idea. They're adding parking, but they're taking away parking. You're adding huge improvements, which are going to bring a lot more people to the park. All I've heard city staff say this evening is the outreach said people want parking. People are going to drive. The parking, traffic impacts. Everything is parking, 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 and you're taking parking away. So what I suggest is a win-win, which is a lot of times you guys have to guess years, decades in the future what people are going to want. Why not push the elimination of the perimeter parking on 16th and Colorado till phase 3, till you see what the traffic impacts are? If there's not a lot of traffic impacts, if everybody's in self-drive cars and nobody's driving to the park, then you implement phase 3 and take away the parking. But you don't have to take it away first or second. Let's see what the impacts are before we take it away. We've taken away enough parking with the Expo line. Those are my comments. Just in answer to your question, if I can get in within time, there is a crosswalk. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
There is a crosswalk right there at the gateway for the Expo line, so you can get off the Expo line right through that gateway.
At the intersection.
At that intersection right between 15th and 16th.
Right, but not at the mid-block.
That kind of is mid-block. It is 15th Street is mid-block, so it's about 100 feet from 15th Street.
Okay.
And
good.
the second thing, just quickly, if you, as a creative office owner, I may not look toward the avenue, toward Colorado Avenue or even Olympic, but there is a pocket of single level housing between Broadway and Colorado. I don't own property there. I have no horse in the race. But if you were to upzone that area between Lincoln and 17th Street, you'd have an opportunity for a lot of housing there.
Very
and
good.
A lot of incentive. So
Thank
that's
you.
all I have. Thank you.
Former Mayor Mike Feinstein. I think you were on the council and involved with the Fisher Lumber purchase.
I was. We bought it too late, but at least we bought it. But I'm here tonight to keep capping the I-10 freeway on your minds and on the minds of future community members. And an earlier draft of this plan actually had a freeway cap between 14th and 17th as a early tentative idea. It got dropped, obviously, for finances. I think you need to cap it between 11th and 14th to 17th in this area. It's flat. You can have fields or other public spaces on the flat area, and on the slants on the sides of the freeway, put housing, extend the Pico neighborhood. So how do you pay for that, including how do you pay for phase 2 and 3? I'd like to see you give direction tonight to staff or come back later to ask them to start researching how you can cooperate with LA as it develops its public bank. They're starting their public process now. City of Claremont also wants to talk to them about how to work together. And obviously public banks cut down the lending costs for infrastructure. It'll help with your affordable housing as well. Also, when we cap the freeway in terms of how realistic it is, down the line, I think we need to be thinking about carbon sequestration technologies, and if we cap the freeway, how that might be built together, how we can get some funds that way. Obviously, if we reform Prop 13 and put a land value tax in, that could be an additional source of funding. And had we done that when we put the freeway in 65, we would have had hundreds of millions of dollars, and we could have paid for the freeway caps from day one. So I don't know how much time I have left, but other thing I want to remind people is the call to action, 1995, that was put out by the sports fields community. That helped drive this process. It was part of the 96 council campaign, and then we voted in 97 to move in this direction with the park and get Fisher Lumber, even though it took us longer to buy. So 25 years just since then. It takes a long time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I have Lori Brown. I haven't called yet. And then it looks like John C. Smith, you have Linda Armstrong donating time to you. Okay, come on up.
I was hoping to go after John. Can we change orders here?
Go ahead, John.
Good evening, Council. John C. Smith, Recreation and Parks Commissioner. I want to focus on three things tonight. First, this great three-phase plan. Also, I want to talk about the Boys and Girls Club proposal, and finally, dogs. I think Councilwoman Hara had mentioned the workshops. I went to all of them. I did a lot of work on this project, and they were well attended. It cheered my soul to see so many people, and the very reason that you have this project before you tonight is because of all that input. The original three designs that you saw, they weren't good enough. They did not fulfill the overall goal of increasing field space. And, you know, at the time, the city did the right thing. Director Ginsburg, they said, go back to the drawing board, come up with something else. And when we saw this something else, the plan you're seeing tonight, we were all in a room with all the stakeholders. You know, FSAC was there, commissioners, city staff members, all the baseball people, Little League, soft pitch. And I remember saying, I went around the room, does everybody like this plan? And everybody said, yes, it's a go. And that's the plan you have tonight. The good part is also we should have $25 million to get phase 1 done. That $20 million from the SMC bond and $5 million from the city. And that means we'd only need another $15 million for phase 2. That's $3 million for 5 years. So if we push the timeline a little bit, we might be able to have this park starting to be like a year or two from now. Okay, so the very first time I ever touched a basketball, and I played basketball every day of my life for about 7 years when I was a kid, the very first time I ever touched a basketball was at a Boys and Girls Club. And, you know, their work is, you know, exemplary. However, if our commission had thought that that was a good proposal to put into Memorial Park at this time, trust me, we would have recommended it. We did not, and there was not a motion for that. And, you know, there was a lot of reservations. For one, it would blow up this plan that took so hard to get us. It would put a big building where the parking is. It would delay the Memorial Park plan for many more years. It would also force the city to come up with millions of dollars we don't have to provide underground parking. And we're still waiting on the $35 million for the airport park expansion. We're already packing a lot into this plan. We already have a gym there, and we already have city programs, and we already have PAL there. We shouldn't be putting all our eggs in one basket. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about dogs. I got 40 emails about that dog run. And so we recommended that we find some kind of way to keep the dog run at Memorial. I have an idea where we could keep at least a temporary dog park there during phase 1. And our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, we're talking about how we can create more dog parks. In fact, dog parks that are farther north than just Colorado. The Memorial Park Dog Run is as far north, there's no dog park north of Colorado and Santa Monica. And, that's one of the things we're trying to address in our Park and Recreation Master Plan. This is a great plan. It took a lot of people and a lot of effort to get here. We won't have to wait years to build it. We have money for phase 1 now, and I think it deserves your unanimous support. There were some issues about the community, about 16th Street, about the workshops, about diamond sports versus soccer sports. I know some of you might have questions. If you want, I can answer a lot of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lori Brown?
Thank you, everybody. How exciting that we're planning another park, Memorial Park, but now you understand some of the challenges that our commission faces, where everybody wants something, we don't have enough land to put it all in. This commission took an enormous amount of time, and I want to thank city staff for all the work that they've done to try to put all the pieces into this pie. As John C. Smith said, we looked at this plan, and we're asking tonight for you to just authorize phase 1. Phase 1 will give the much needed field space and will give us a chance to revisit some of the other challenges that people are asking for, whether the Boys and Girls Clubs or PAL or parking. That would come in phase 2 and 3, of which we don't have the funding for. So tonight I'm going to ask you specifically to fund phase 1 and let us go back and take a look at, because we do need to do in the plan, in the design that was shown, it does not have a dog park, so it does need to have a dog run in it. And we did speak to the public to find out how big an area that they need. To answer some of the questions here tonight, we believe that the center hub will provide a new park space area plus the walking area. We'd like to relook at combining some of the athletic pieces that are spaced far apart. We'd like to bring them together. We'd also like to take another look at whether it's synthetic turf or grass. That park is right now metered for can do reclaimed water. So as far as looking at the heat source, it's late at night for me, I'm never really good. Looking at the heat source of how much that plastic will do, we'd really like to get a chance at it. So if I can reiterate, please pass phase 1, let us take a look at the dog park, let us take a look at moving the trees, and let's take a look at the synthetic turf. So that's what I'm going to say to you tonight, and thank you again.
Thank you. That's our last speaker, so we'll close our public hearing. And council members, let's discuss this item. Councilmember Winder.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Mayor Pro Tem, I had a follow-up question, first of all, for staff. Just curious about the recommendation was in phase 1 to delay the streetscape improvements. Was that based strictly on not having identifiable source of the extra $4 million, or did it have to do with other issues of construction phasing, such as doing a streetscape and then having to rip it up for another phase?
Oh.
To do with the funding limitations.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember McCune.
Mine wasn't a question, so if somebody else has a question.
Any other questions, Council? Okay, go ahead.
Well, we can't fund phase 1 tonight. That's not what's before us. I do anticipate, though, moving this forward. This has been such a long time coming. In the packet we got, there are documents going all the way back to 1997, anticipating what we might do with this park. And the public process has been quite exemplary and very supportive of diamond sports throughout. I was still a little bit surprised in the packet to see this conceptual plan for Memorial Park. As other council members have mentioned...
For those on the radio listening, he just held up the 7 of diamonds card.
This is a fulfillment of a dream for diamond sports people. But I do share the concern that some other council members have raised that by filling this park with diamond sport fields, we're precluding some of the other possible uses that might be appropriate. And parks do provide more than just sports space. As Councilmember Winter pointed out, we have a plan, albeit a deferred plan, to build a neighborhood around where this park is. And I'm a little bit concerned in the long run that when all is said and done, there won't be space here for the neighborhood uses. And yet by the time we get to the end of phase 3, we might have 227 acres of new land to consider using for regional sports facilities out at the airport. So I don't want to get too far ahead and commit us too much in the long term to phase 2 and 3. And maybe staff has some ideas on how we could not mess with the momentum on phase 1 and still retain a little bit of flexibility in the future as new information may come to us. But I just have to comment, I dug out this card for a reason. This is a monoculture in a park. And I just have to question whether that is the appropriate thing for the 3rd largest park in the city, located right in the middle of our city and right in the heart of what someday will be a neighborhood where kids will need unstructured space to play.
Councilmember Winter?
Well, I do think that whatever else we do tonight, and I hear Councilmember McEwen's concerns, we definitely need to go ahead with phase 1. I mean, we've bought that Fisher Lumberland a long time ago. We've already made plans to vacate the public landscape facilities there and taking it on the chin a little bit for that plan. And I think we owe it to the community to expand this park. So I think we need to move ahead with phase 1. I'm welcome to hear from my colleagues about how they feel about phase 2 and phase 3. I think there's probably an opportunity with some creative design to try to accommodate most of the needs of the diamond sports community and the prospects of having a neighborhood park plan there. I heard from Ms. Ginsburg about that hub. Maybe there's a way to artfully move things around a little bit to increase the capacity of that hub to be a neighborhood gathering place. Maybe there's room for some picnic tables. I do think that at Clover Park we have all those sports facilities, but what's very popular there is those little outdoor grilling spots. That's an opportunity for people to have parties on the weekends, so maybe there's a way to shoehorn some of that activity into the hub. And I can also just say, as someone who uses the existing dog run at Memorial Park, I hope that sort of facility stays there. I hope that doesn't preclude me from voting on this city attorney as a user of the dog run, but it's a pretty small little space right now, but it's quite effective. So there's got to be a way to get a dog facility in there.
Councilmember Marina.
So one of the challenges that I see here is that 16th Street or 15th Street, which is a vacated street, provides some flexibility in this plan. And I know it's complicated, and by no means do we want to stop the progress here, certainly with regards to phase 1. But there's an opportunity to use that space, right? I mean, is it grills? Is it a dog run? In any way, shape, or form, to take that space back. It is not a functional street. If you know where the parking is, you can go there, but you certainly don't turn off of Colorado and use that street. And it's an opportunity that we have now that once we start laying the fields, we will not have the opportunity to take back. So I see 16th Street, 15th Street as a real opportunity.
I think it's the 16th. Could we maybe put the layout up on the screen? That might help us a bit.
It's a street,
and
correct.
And
right. Right.
And then, given Councilmember Winter's questions, we may want to look at the phase 1 layout too.
Is it 16th? 16th. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Everything else, yes.
Right,
Still
right where the
factual.
district is. That's right. So 16th Street is a real opportunity for us. I agree with the passive recreation space. I think it's really interesting to consider that space. When I looked at the plan originally, the idea of the border of the park that is currently scheduled for phase 2 gives us a lot of opportunity, I think, for community engagement. It also is the consumer interface piece of the park. And I think you mentioned, you don't want a barrier to entry to the park. The way it looks now is that it's in phase 2. But if we want people to come into the park, we should potentially consider that as phase 1. And I know that option is on the table. But bringing people into the park, I think, is really important. Most of us who've lived in the city a while know that 14th, is that right? 14th is our main access to the park. And we could use some improvements, some welcoming from 14th into the park. I think that's really important. I loved Councilmember Winter's suggestion of the design build contract auditing. And I know we're spoken for now with our auditors, but that is certainly something that we should look at, especially considering that only 20% of the park will be built in phase 1. 20% of the dollars spent on the park will be built in phase 1, and that we still have another 80 million or so to spend in phases 2 and 3. So that would be money well spent, I think. My own interest, skateboarding, of course. One of the great frustrations I've had with the Cove Skate Park is that you can't enter or see skateboarding from Olympic. And most skate parks will endear the crowd when they can see skateboarding from the street. So I know that we have a chance to build out the skateboarding section a little bit, but I'd love there to be some sort of access into that area from Olympic. And I'm intrigued by our former Mayor Feinstein's freeway cap. I love that idea. It certainly gives us some housing opportunities, but then that begs the question to what the true use of the park is in the future. And if it's programmed 100%, then we lose an opportunity for the rest of the community to experience the park.
Okay, Councilmember Winter.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to go backwards and jump into another question for staff. So I just thought about this. I'm looking at the diagram of phase 1 there, and if you could also put up the diagram of phase 2, I'm sort of in the lower right-hand corner of phase 1. There's that fields included, and it's also included in the upper right-hand corner of phase 2. So how does that work? Is there different things going on between phase 1 and phase 2 at that particular space?
Yes, so in phase 1, that is left as a grass practice field. So it does not meet dimensions of any regulation field. So it's more open to practice and free play, but wouldn't be any regulation field. In phase 2, because we do have the expansion into 16th Street, we can then accommodate the 2 youth baseball fields that are regulation sized plus the softball field. So with the reorientation of the most southeast field and the expansion into 16th, that becomes a regulation field with additional amenities. Which
and what
in
is the
first one
surface?
does not.
Is it artificial turf in the current conception, or is it grass?
They're grass.
But so in phase 1, that's sort of a temporary field. We're just going to be expanding the boundaries of it under your proposal.
It's a temporary.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think about whether there might be an opportunity there to sort of address the concerns of having some additional passive recreation space.
Absolutely.
Along the lines of what I heard from Ms. Ginsburg about a permitting scheme that allow both youth sports to be there, but also the general public. That might, particularly since it's going to be a sort of temporary field, might be a good place for that.
We agree.
Mr. Cole, you're in the queue. Yep. Councilmember Hara.
You know, in looking at this particular picture, maybe that might also answer some of your concerns that having that open space where they can just go in there, since that is only a practice field. If it could be opened to the public, not closed completely like we have to do with the diamonds in order to preserve them, maybe that might be a good conception in addition to your thoughts of Councilmember Winter. So I think that that's actually a very good possibility of having something open. So
good. Well, let me jump in. I have some challenges with the design. I think they reflect some of what you're hearing from other council members. I too am interested in seeing something move forward so that we can begin to use the Fisher lumber site. But even this phase one kind of troubles me with some of the design elements in particular. So to begin with, one of the most active pedestrian spaces or thoroughfares in this neighborhood comes from the Expo Line station. And at that corner where this park meets the Expo Line pedestrian traffic and the bike path traffic, there is going to be a giant fence for the backstop of the diamond in the northeast corner. And I think that's a design mistake in phase one that I don't want to see kept in the final master plan. I would like to see some kind of open entrance in that area. I could suggest that if we just turned that paired set of fields 90 degrees, right? If you just flipped it so that the diamond was in this, the diamonds were at midpoint of the blocks. You know, the backstops were at the midpoint of the blocks. Maybe that helps. In fact, if you capture some more of 16th Street in phase one, as Councilmember Morena is suggesting, maybe you can get some more space and you can space those two combo fields out more and you can create a pathway between them that could be inviting through the park. I hate designing stuff from the council dais because it often doesn't work right. But it's but here's an example of something that I just think it's a huge miss for us. We've got a giant pathway through the park in the mid-block where there aren't pedestrians, and we ought to be using that northeast corner better. Additionally, the phase one money, is going significantly to building a parking structure with tennis courts on top of it. We're adding a ton of parking. I'm not convinced that the parking is the best use of this land space here, and that it's integrated or considered as to how it fits with the neighborhood plan. So I do want to go forward with something in phase one. I don't know how to fix that problem. We don't have the dog run in phase one, so by going forward with phase one, notwithstanding Commissioner Brown's comments and Commissioner Smith's comments related to keeping the dog run, I could lose my most important job of head of household at home if I lose that dog run. So I do think that's a real concern. Further, regarding the design, putting the hub in the center of the block, it feels to me like a central courtyard, which is something that we've avoided in all of our planning principles throughout the city ever since we learned that they're terrible, like the Water Garden, for example, that kind of shields off the community, fences in this park, and then all of the activities in the center as opposed to engaging the streetscape. So from a design standpoint, here we start with phase one, we build that hub right off the bat. More puns, this is just filled with puns. And a question for staff, I guess the practice field on the east side that was just discussed in the previous question, that's got to have a fence line against 16th Street, I think, as well, right? Because, I mean, you're hitting balls in that direction. How does that mean we have like one long fence line?
I think it's something we would need to look at in design there. Right now, it's frankly leftover space in many ways because it's not dimensioned for a regulation size field for youth at all because it's too small. We weren't intending to, the phase one plan does not provide the funding to extend the park at that point in time on 16th Street currently. In the future phases, we can take advantage of 16th Street. I think whether it has a fence or not and how the home base is oriented is certainly something we could look at design, whether it's just an open field like at Clover, for example, the upper field has one baseball diamond but nothing else. Maybe it's that, and you make do if you're practicing there, and it's not fenced. So if the council wants to give us some direction in that way, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is an area that could be made more inviting by just not being a diamond. Here, it breaks my heart as a former ball player to say such things. But true here, I think that we need to somehow create a space that's more inviting and more and less hardened. As it is, we're creating giant fenced-off spaces in addition to the big ones that we have now, plus a parking structure, and and that's how you're greeted in the park. So I don't know how to get there for phase one unless we look at something with a different design. I mean, this input I think might not be enough to create a meaningful path forward on phase one, given the concerns that I have, at least so far. But Councilman, Mr. Cole, you're in the queue.
Yeah, I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared to respond to your question, Mayor Pro Tem, without a better understanding of where everyone's going. But I did want to inject into this discussion, again, the reality of funding. Here's how the funding stacks up. We have up to $20 million that was earmarked in the college bond. We've talked extensively about that. We've been in serious discussions with the school district about some portion of their bond money going into Memorial Park, again, because of their interest in diamond sports. We have a total of $2.7 million programmed in the out years of our capital program, I think in fiscal year 21, which is one more cycle. 2.7 million, right? That doesn't stretch very far. And we don't actually know, since we haven't designed or bid this, whether in fact what we're assuming we can purchase in phase one for the funding we have available is actually viable. We've had some unpleasant surprises. So all I'm saying is that whatever we come up with, whatever the council decides to direct, given the financial realities facing the city, which are really quite different than they've been in many years. And it's not because we've overspent. It's not because we haven't managed our revenues well. It's because the economy is changing, and the traditional sources of funding for Santa Monica, which have been extraordinarily positive for 3 decades, are based upon a 20th century economy. And as people spend less, I have to inject this reality for those who are listening and thinking, well, why don't we just, we've always had money, so why don't we just throw a ton of money at making all this stuff work? The world is changing, but our tax system is not. And so we're going to have some very significant financial challenges. So let's keep in mind that our ability to solve problems at this location is limited by our fiscal resources.
Councilmember Marina.
So I think you're onto something with the communication with the outside coming into the park. Nor am I trying to design from the dais, but the concept of being able to enter the park at 16th and 14th Street, at the corners of 14th and 16th Street, significantly changes the dynamic of the park. The park never went all the way to Colorado, so no one's ever entered it from that point. But once we take that space back, it will become an entry point. So from a vision perspective, it changes entirely the way that we communicate with the park. I was looking on Google Earth and playing with the imaging, and once you come off the train, you do want to come into the park. You're exactly right. And you come into the park from that northeast corner. So then that becomes really important. What Director Ginsburg was saying is perhaps there's an entryway somewhat similar to Clover Park. And if you look at Clover Park, I forget the street, it's 25th or so, 24th, but the corner of 24th and Ocean Park, you look at Clover Park, there's a nice little sign, and then there's a huge open field. That's great, and that's where the grills are, and that's where the picnic benches are, and I can't tell you how many parties I've been to growing up at that park, at those picnic benches. So something to the effect of the $20 million coming from SMC, some undisclosed amount from the school district bearing the use of those fields, and the $2.7 million we have gets us somewhere in that $25 to $30 million range, assuming that the school district will kick in $5+ million. So with that, I think we can accomplish phase one with the consideration of developing the border, which if we look at phase two, some of that border, and I think Director Ginsburg had told me that $4 million was the amount of the improvements for that border area. So if we can include a portion of that money, would you mind flipping to phase? Yeah, there you go. So that border along Colorado, that maybe then comes down to 16th, we can accomplish the 16th Street vacancy challenge. We can accomplish the entering the park, feeling good challenge. But then we can also start the process of phase one.
Councilmember Winter.
Where to begin? So, I hear Mayor Pro Tem O'Day's concerns about sort of the pedestrian experience and the permeability at the borders of this park, but I think we just have to acknowledge, just as we did with the multipurpose field across the street that we just approved, that you just can't do these things without fences, right? They're just a necessity, right? So sometimes, as much as we'd like to have an enhanced pedestrian experience, we can't do it everywhere. I also have a question quickly with the city manager or city staff. We're asked in item number 2 here to propose to proceed with the RFP for proposals for design and pre-construction services of phase 1 and 2 of the master plan. Clearly, we haven't heard from some of the stakeholders directly, like the college. So when we say go ahead with the design and pre-construction services, there's still going to be room within that to accommodate some different things that we've heard from the community, right, and from the Rec and Parks Commission, et cetera. So that being said, understanding that, this has been long a morning, we need to move ahead, I'm going to make a motion that we direct the staff to proceed with the RFP for design and pre-construction services of phase 1 and 2 of the master plan, and to take direction from us to take a hard look at what Mayor Pro Tem O'Day said about the possible access from the expo station, whether rotating fields 3 and 4 might provide an opportunity for a little permeability of that corner by the expo line, to look at this entrance on 14th Street where the drop-off is and see if there's anything we can do design to at least make that a little bit more of a pedestrian experience as well as a drop-off experience, so that people walk through there and have an inviting entrance. to look into whether or not in either phase 1 or phase 2 we can incorporate the idea of using some of the 16th Street that's been vacated to address the possibility of some flexibility of this temporary field that is designated as Field 5 for passive recreational use, at least in phase 1, and to the best extent possible, add, given limited real estate, to add more community amenities to the hub, including the idea of having some of those barbecue grills. And then finally, not to forget the long-term planning to add a dog run someplace. So that's my motion.
Second. And I'll comment on that if I may.
Go ahead, Councilmember McKeon.
In no way do I think that our concerns should stop this process tonight. There have been too many workshops with too many people turned out, and my 7 of diamonds certainly does not beat a full house. So I don't want us to step back. What I want us to do is move forward with some thoughtfulness and some caution and some awareness that once this piece of land gets programmed to the max, it's not available for any other purpose. So as long as we're moving forward with the cautions and concerns expressed in the motion by Councilmember Winter, I think we'd be quite comfortable doing this. And I think the people who are advocates for the diamond sports need to realize that we're not saying we don't want the diamonds. We want everything. We want the diamonds and more. We want to be able to accommodate a future neighborhood.
I should know better than to challenge the master.
That would be your ace in the hole.
Oh boy, I do want to say, so I appreciate the idea that we could provide direction here, and that this direction could get incorporated into the phase 1 design build contract. But as I look at this plan, I feel like what's missing is the design part, that it needs stronger architecture, that it needs stronger design thinking, and we aren't going to get that in a design build contract, I'm afraid. And the direction from the dais being what it might be, I think is going to be helpful, but I'm not sure it's enough. And I do think that we need some stronger integration with the neighborhood plan, and particularly the 16th Street questions, as to how we would expand into 16th Street. As part of the conversation with the school district, I'd like to hear us talking with them about their headquarters building, because it's an obvious opportunity to expand some of the park services and space in a place where we're currently struggling to find space and put uses. And if that's the only reason people are driving on that street, on 16th Street today, is to get into the parking lot in front of the headquarters building. So it feels to me like it needs more design work and not a design build contract yet. And I wonder, do we know what we've spent so far on the design contract? Because I wouldn't want to look to go out to fill the house again and to do more of the community outreach. I think we can work with what's been given to us already, but we need some really strong design house thinking.
Good evening, council members. Chris Tischel from Architecture Services. No, what you have before you is not a design. It is a master plan. And so the project delivery method that we're proposing, that's one of the main advantages we have, is it's a progressive design build. It's the same process we've used for Tongva Park and these other things, where we still have the control of the design up until the point of when we return to you with a cost proposal, a guaranteed maximum price for construction. So this isn't something where we are necessarily limiting ourselves because we're gaining that cost certainty up front. We still have that control to own and manage the design. Design changes we have obviously reflect construction cost, and so we need to be considerate of when we change the design and what that does to the construction budget or the project budget as a whole. But we absolutely have the control to, we plan to bring in a design team that has a real designer to design this. This is a master plan, higher level thing.
Can you tell me what you mean when you say that describe the Tongva process? Because that was
So
that was one of the top architects in the world.
yes, I understand, but the process was the same, right? We didn't go out a traditional design build where we put out what we want, right, in qualifications and programming, and a design build team comes back to us and says, we'll make it look like this picture for X amount of dollars, right, up front. And then as we go into design, they say, oh, I'm sorry, you know, we can't accommodate this change because that wasn't in the budget from the beginning, right? And so all we're asking for essentially is the collaboration of design and construction together, but a bidding process for a design. So there would be a full 1-year design process. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. You know, when I think design build, I think of the contractor who builds a house and, you know, puts up,
exactly,
you know,
and
gets
so
the permits through, but doesn't have it architected.
No, and that's not the process that we've been doing on any of these projects. Same city services, city yards, parking structure 6, all of these, we prefer to sort of control design and have the flexibility to change, knowing that that has construction impact. So we don't have the cost certainty up front. But what they would be bidding on is they would give us a hard price, a guaranteed price for complete design process and a markup on true cost for construction.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Winter?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, in that design build process, how much opportunity there is to bring in outside designers who might add a particular grace note to the project? I think of for instance, over at Los Amigos Park, there's the concession stand and restrooms that I believe Daley Genick designed, which are very modest, but really enhance the experience there, just in a very small building. So is there a design build scheme an opportunity to bring in someone who might do something really interesting in the hub or something like that, or do you basically use the design team that comes with the RFP process?
As well, we're already hearing from the industry a lot of outside interest from some very interesting teams that are that have been tracking this project and are very interested in partnering with us.
Yeah, so our goal would be to pursue at least excellence in design in those particular buildings along with the park layout.
As is always our case.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Can I ask, while staff is responding to questions, one of the challenges I have felt in this is the process, that this is the first time we're discussing this, really, right? It was under a different item previously, and so the council really didn't provide much input on this master plan prior to it coming to us tonight, and it's, you know, fairly tightly laid out as we're observing. What will be the process then going forward for us to approve any of these teams? What will that process look like? What's the council's involvement?
So the schedule we have right now, pending direction today, would be to put out the RFP and come back to you in January with a proposal of the teams and ask for direction to move forward. Design would then take until the end of the year. Currently, we're planning community input through the commissions process, you know, going back through Rec and Parks, multiple trips, FSAC, sustainability, urban forestry, right, to provide additional opportunities through multiple meetings with each of those commissions and boards to refine the design. As we mentioned earlier, the environmental impact analysis would come back before council. The current intent was not to come back at a midpoint of design, but that's obviously something that we can come back with either a study session or an info item, or proceed with further direction if that's something that.
But it seems to me the bidders need to know that too, that that's part of would be part of the process, because that's going to be important to their.
Absolutely. Spelling all of that out is how we get it. And so, again, if you want to give clear direction, we can incorporate all of that.
And similarly, Councilmember Winter's motion has a number of ideas here from us, but in responding to an RFP, I'm going to want, if I'm a bidder, to keep anything outside of my control out of my bid, right? So I might not be incentivized to say spill into 16th Street if the city hasn't said that we're looking for somebody to do that explicitly, right? So we need to be quite explicit at this stage that that's part of the plan.
We can absolutely be explicit that it is going to be studied and evaluated as part of the design.
Okay, Mr. Cole?
The council may be moving toward consensus, but I worry about a papering over fundamental disagreements. And I'm hearing from the Parks and Recreation Commission and the process a strong endorsement of this product, and I'm hearing from the council varying degrees of support, and a motion that will reopen a lot of different questions, and then we go back to other stakeholders wondering whether what we've started is turning out to be quite different than what we end with. So I do worry that, with all due respect, Chris, I'm not sure that putting all this stuff in a mix master and hoping that it'll all come out, that the designer will be so brilliant as to solve some of these problems. I think there's a limited amount of space and a limited amount of money. I don't want to put my thumb on where you end up, but if we end up at midpoint of the design, having the council redesign or make fundamental choices, and then have Parks and Recreation Commission stakeholders say, whoa, wait a minute, that's not what we signed up for when we were in the process. I just worry about getting to moving down the road as if we have consensus, and then the consensus falling apart. So we only have 5 council members here tonight. We may want to take a little bit of a pause and have greater clarity, rather than a motion that gets 5 votes, but which has mutually potentially exclusive and or expensive design choices that we push down the road, and we end up having to come back and having another really difficult challenge when we've already spent a whole lot of time and money thinking that a brilliant designer is going to make all these problems go away. I think what Councilmember Winter said at the beginning of his motion is true. We want to put big ball fields in this park, and we want to have 6 or 7 of them. It's not going to be a permeable park. And we either accept that and work at the margins to mitigate that, or we don't accept that and have a very different park design. But to sort of hope that we can do both, we can have a permeable park and 7 diamonds and a dog run and an expanded hub and and we can do it all for $2.7 million in phase 1. I worry about that, and I may be wrong, and I hope I am, but I'm sensing that you may be sending us on a path that will come back and have us once again face the same questions, but having spent a whole bunch more money.
So an alternative would be to take another look at the master plan and put some options in front of the council so that we can make some of those programming decisions here and some of the border decisions.
Or a decision clearly about what you want tonight, or when there's 7 council members. But, right now I'm hearing that the council wants a number of things that may not be able to be reconciled just through creative design.
I'd just like to point out that my motion just was a direction to look in those possible enhancements, that it started off acknowledging that we're never going to be able to wholly address the challenges of fencing ball fields and permeability to pedestrian experience, but I don't think there's any reason to come back and delay moving forward on this, given the motion I made. I mean, there could be little tiny solutions. We have, I talked about that entrance on 14th Street, for instance. We'll probably, I'm sure we have a percent for art that's involved in this project, so maybe that's where the art goes. I mean, we can think about some of those things around the edge, but I'm suggesting we go ahead with phase 1 and phase 2.
And I'm not saying that that's a bad decision.
And my second on that motion did not anticipate perfect reconciliation.
Yeah.
It asked for thoughtfulness and flexibility.
And that's what I wanted clarity for. I mean, if the council, by a majority vote, says this plan, by and large, makes sense, then let's understand that this plan, by and large, is going to be what you get. And that's all. I'm just suggesting that the idea that somehow this plan is going to dramatically morph into something very different just through creative design is just not realistic. It's going to be, there are ways in which this can be tweaked. I wanted to ensure that.
That was my intent. I completely understand that. I think you also have acknowledged that there are elections in the future, and you might have a different council that has a totally different position on diamond sports, right? So nothing is certain in this life, except death and taxes.
Right, right. But we can, again, just to clarify, because I don't want to leave a misimpression, I'm not suggesting that this plan is not the right plan. It's it's what we produced. What I'm suggesting is that to assume that we can just design our way out of the problems that have been identified, principally by you, Mayor Pro Tem, it's not realistic to imagine that there'll be dramatic changes within the budget and the program. And either vote yes or vote no on that basis, but to hope that this will all just magically, it's not an easy puzzle to solve, and you're going to have hard choices to make.
Councilmember McCune.
Already said my piece.
So that one specific. Go ahead, Councilmember Moreno.
Ted, Councilmember Wonder, would you mind reading your motion again? Because
I'd be happy to. I'm not so sure I could, but
but perhaps you can consider.
I think that the staff took notes. I would endeavor to do so.
Let's work on it again.
Because I think it covers a lot of that last part of the discussion, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are nibbling at the edges. We are making the park more welcome. We are including some passive space. We are considering 16th Street. I feel like you addressed a lot of those concerns, and phase 1 and 2, we have some of those options still available to us. What is not entirely clear to me is within the process, where do we fit in? We want the public involved, we want all the commissions involved, but then at some point, what is a finally designed park, I assume, will come before us. Is that correct? At the end of the public process?
If you give us that direction, we will fold it into the schedule.
Okay, thank you. Do we have some sort of
let's
recap?
Did you want
the
me to?
motion is to
The motion
move forward
was,
on
as
phase
in
1.
item 2, is direct staff to proceed with the RFP for design and pre-construction services of phase 1 and 2 of the master plan, and to the best extent feasible, that to look at some of the issues that have been raised, including making the entrance on 14th Street and mid-block more pedestrian friendly, to consider Mayor Pro Tem's idea to rotate fields 3 and 4 to potentially create the opportunity for permeability at the corner near the expo station, to look at the possible virtues of expanding into the vacated 16th Street real estate to accommodate some of our goals, to look at least in the interim for flexibility of the temporary field that's sort of mid-block on the 16th Street side to allow the opportunities for whatever passive recreation needs there might be from the community, to contemplate whether it's feasible to add more community amenities such as barbecues into the hub, and to not neglect the possibility of adding a dog run. I'd also suggest that, since the staff did hear from the Rec and Parks Commission that the recommendations they had made, some of which may or may not have been folded into the design so far, also be looked at. And just to conclude, that I acknowledge that whatever comes out this process will not be perfect, but perfection is not for us mortals, and we will just do the best we can.
Yeah, I thank you for reiterating. I think that accomplishes our goals, and we are going to have to be creative, and so the only piece that is left uncertain to me is at what point we're involved in that design process. We don't want to take any power away from the public, but we certainly want to be involved.
And we are the public, yeah. Councilmember Hara?
So I do believe that there might have been a friendly amendment to the first motion. So I just wanted to go back to Councilmember McEwen and to see whether or not he accepted that. And in addition to that, then I think that I would also like to add a friendly amendment to that, and that would be for staff to come back to us once this is into full conception, prior to moving it totally forward, finalizing it.
So staff would come back, that would be part of the motion, and prior to finalizing the design.
Correct.
Okay. And what was the previous friendly amendment you were mentioning?
I believe that there was something that was added to the first motion, so that's why I thought I'd just go ahead and...
I think that was covered in the
Exactly, that was
reiteration
not in
from
the first
Councilmember
one,
Winter.
exactly, so...
Okay, so Councilmember Winterer covered it. in
You're
his
good, you
recap.
covered
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So your friendly amendment is that
They come back to us.
they come back to us. I guess that's reasonable. It will slow down the process some, and I'll agree to it. Well, I also bear in mind the city manager's concerns that we will then rip it apart and send it
Start
back
all over
again.
again.
I personally pledge not to do so, but I'll consider that as a friendly amendment.
So will the secretary.
Thank you.
I would like to see or suggest that we need to be more direct with some of this. I mean, I think we need to close 16th Street on at least the north side, period, and expand into that space and not just consider it or look at it.
Yeah, I think that is something, as we heard, the city attorney would have to look into the process for doing that. There is private property there that might have some concerns.
Need some access.
The school district, I mean, I certainly, we should definitely look at it, but I don't think we can guarantee that that's part of the process without a further evaluation of it.
Yeah,
But
again,
again,
it has a south entrance, so
and again,
we
my-
close the
my-
north.
My concern, again, I'm not trying to weigh in on how you should design the park or the programming, but closing that street in order to accomplish some of these goals will add additional cost. That's if we end up making everybody happy and this costs $35 million, then we won't be building any of it.
Well, an analysis might yield that revelation, and we might find that, okay, we need to defer that part into phase 2 or phase 3.
And again, all I'm trying to do is set realistic expectations down the road.
Part of my motion is that we at least fulfill that promise to the community that when we purchased the Fisher Lumber site in 2005, we're going to turn it into a park. So
Similarly, I think that I would like to see the amount of parking cut, because I think parking is consuming a lot of the space on this property and is not as necessary as it might appear. We've got protected bike lanes on both sides of the park and expo line access on the north side. And I think we're putting too many potatoes in this 5-pound sack, and one of them is parking. The other is the Seven Diamonds.
yeah, as a maker of the motion, I'm generally supportive of acknowledging that the future may not require nearly as much parking as we believe we need now. I also think at the same time, having seen the uses of that park and the amount of gear that gets hauled in and out by parents and coaches, I'd be a little reticent to eliminate the parking that goes on there. I hear you, and I believe in it philosophically, but I think we have to be pragmatic about the world is changing, but not that rapidly.
Councilmember Hara?
Can you just I think that you told us how many parking spaces we would be losing on 16th Street.
A total of 39 spaces. That includes those on 16th Street that would be lost and the ones along Colorado to provide for the Class 1 bike path. So that's a combination. Adding proposed right now 49 spaces to the to supplement the existing parking in the park to a total of 128 spaces.
So in other words, we're just gaining like 10 parking spaces? Yeah. Thank you.
I think we should call the question.
Okay, so we have a motion by Winter, second by McEwen. Move forward with the Phase 1 and 2 RFP design and construction, which includes direction to consider the 14th Street mid-block entrance, rotate the fields on the northeast end, creating a better entry for the Expo pedestrian traffic, expand into 16th Street, add more flexibility of use than or on top of the practice field, right? Include barbecues and other community amenities at the hub, incorporate the dog run, and have staff come back with design to council. Did I miss anything on there?
Nope.
Okay. Okay. Councilmember Morena?
Sorry, one thing. It's the barbecue concept is at the hub. You know where barbecues were really effective, not necessarily in the hub, is at Virginia Park, where they border the side of the park. So if it's friendly to the maker, I might suggest just adding barbecues and not necessarily directing it to the hub.
Sure, adding barbecues if possible.
Sure.
Both spatially and budgetarily.
And
including vegetarian barbecue.
Yeah, yes. Pizza ovens.
Sorry.
Mr.
We've
Cole.
now had 3 recitations of this, and I just want to be clear. This is consider all of those things. There's a preference for those things. We want to, but there's not a requirement that we successfully do that. That's helpful to know.
Okay. Can we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Morena?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
No. All but one. So that moves forward. And
I'll move that we authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute with Wood on the EIA.
Second.
Can we have the roll call vote?
Sure. Councilmember Morena?
Yes.
Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
No for consistency, right? Do we need another motion?
I move we authorize the city manager to negotiate fiscal and use agreements with SMC and SMUSD for capital improvement costs for Phase 1 implementation.
Second.
Okay.
Actually, before we move forward with that one, I don't know whether or not I need to recuse myself from that one since it is in agreement with SMC.
Well, I would jump in on the city attorney. We're just authorizing it, not necessarily the deal, right? Would you have to recuse yourself if there was a MOU or something like that?
If we're voting on the contract, but not.
That's correct. Councilmember, it would be your individual decision. I do not think that the law expressly requires you to recuse yourself from this item.
Oh, thank you so very much.
In that case, could we have a roll call vote?
Sure. Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Morena? Yes. And Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
No. All right. Thank you. That concludes item 8A. Thanks everyone for participating. And we can move on to item 9.
9A is the public hearing for proposed street lighting assessment district on 9th Street, and you have one request to speak. And I'll bring, oh, you have it.
Thank you. Do we have a staff report?
Good evening again, Council. Curtis Castle, Public Works, Civil Engineering. I just ask that you open the public hearing, receive any public comment and any ballots for the formation of a streetlight assessment district on 9th Street between Margarita and Alta Avenue.
Thank you for the nice, succinct staff report. Any questions from our council? No? We have one request to speak. Corey Schmidt, are you here? All right.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you guys. Okay, Corey Schmidt for the record. I just want to speak on this item a little bit because I haven't read extremely deep into it. I know that neighborhood, it's a little dark at night, so I agree in terms of street lighting. I've always been not against actual street lighting and making sure that things are safe and, that regard. But what I am concerned about is the addition of new telecommunications technology on our streetlights, and I fear that that will be included in this assessment, mainly because it's to my belief that the recent fires are because of them. So I want to bring that to light so that we can be all aware and that we can protect ourselves, because I know that these streetlights generally fall under the jurisdiction of the FCC, so it's not really something that we can control. So if we allow it to happen, then it's out of our control, and then poof, we have no control over anything. And I just advocate for meters or shielding or some kind of protection or red tape so that we can follow in the footsteps if anything does happen. So that's all that I wanted to bring to light. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. That concludes the public testimony.
Councilmember
Winter.
Oh, sorry. I was going to move the staff recommendation, so I'll second it.
Motion by McEwen, second by Winter.
Councilmember Moreno?
Yes.
Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Hara? Yes. Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
Yes. That motion passes unanimously.
Next, we have 11A, which is adoption of a resolution making findings of local climate, geological, and typographical conditions, and an ordinance adopting the 2019 California Building Standard Codes and Santa Monica local amendments. And you have one request to speak.
Okay. Good evening, honorable council members. My name is Jeff Nespor, and I am the acting building officer for the Building and Safety Division. On behalf of the Planning and Community Development Department, the Fire Department, and the Office of Sustainability and Environment, I would like to present staff's report for the adoption of the 2019 California Building Standards Codes and staff's recommendation for local City of Santa Monica amendments. The 2019 Building Standard Codes are the latest standards in building and fire life safety, which provide minimum fire life safety, structural accessibility, energy, and green requirements. The Building Standard Codes have an effective date of January 1st, 2020, and the proposed local amendments with council's approval will become the city's standards for building design and construction for the next 3 years. Many of the amendments presented here tonight were developed by a collaborative group of local building officials with the help of Santa Monica staff. Each of the technical local amendments are justified by local climatic, geological, or topographical conditions as required by state law. Justification of the amendments and corresponding local conditions are presented in the resolution for council approval. The staff report includes two parts that staff will request council's actions on. First, the resolution for local conditions justification, and secondly, ordinance for the 2016 Building Standards Code, and local amendments. I'm sorry, that should be 2019. Building Standards Code and local amendments.
Good.
Is it remote number 1 or 2 or 3? Oh, this one. Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. The next few slides briefly describes the California Building Code process for adoption at the state and local levels. The Building Standards Commission utilizes a model code, and these model codes are codes that have been developed by a private code development organization. For the building codes, it's International Code Council. For the electrical code, it's NFPA, and for the mechanical and plumbing codes, it's by IAPMO. The Building Standards Commission then, the Building Standards Commission and the state adopting agencies then review the model codes, then make their state amendments. These amendments eliminate conflicts with state laws and includes requirements for different state laws through the various adopting agencies. These adopting agencies are OSHPD, which are the hospitals, DSA, which are the schools, and CAL FIRE, which regulates high-rise buildings, some of our assembly-type buildings, and so forth. Once the state publishes the California Building Code, local jurisdictions have 180 days to review the code and make any amendments that as they see fit. To make local amendments, the local jurisdiction has to have justification to do so. These justifications are either climatic, geological, or topographical. We held a public hearing with the Building Fire Life Safety Commission on August 14th. Our 7 commissioners provided comment to the technical standards and also provided a unanimous recommendation to council to adopt the local amendments. The next step in moving forward with the local amendments is meeting with council, such as we are tonight, to ask for the adoption of the local amendments. Up on the screen here are our existing building code amendments and the various chapters. The local amendments for chapters 8.36, the Energy Code, and chapter 8.106, Green Building Standards Code, were considered by council on September 10th separately from the proposed amendments tonight. This was due to state law requiring approval of local energy amendments by the California Energy Commission. And I understand that the California Energy Commission did approve those local amendments, I believe. And so those will probably be coming back to council shortly for approval. This slide shows the proposed Santa Monica Building Code chapters that we are proposing for tonight. The notable changes to the local amendments are in identified sections on the slide. They are underlined. Many of the local amendments that are being readopted may include minor changes to incorporate updated practices and standards, but the general intent for the prior amendment remains the same. Also, changes include updated section references to be consistent with current building code additions. Even though there may be no change in a local amendment between code cycles, the state does require the local amendments be readopted every code cycle and be justified by a local condition. The majority of the proposed amendments are carryovers from the current amendments. The remaining slides I'm going to briefly discuss, kind of highlight the major changes from the current code cycle to the proposed code cycle. In Chapter 8.08, the Administrative Code, we're going to maintain prior local amendments per required findings and resolution. We're going to remove redundancy with state codes and minor clarifying and edits. We're going to clarify the role of the building officer, and we're going to add or designee due to realignment within the department. Expand records retention to include project plans for single-family dwellings for consistency with internal policy. Remove permit exemption for temporary structures on sloped lots. And establish consistency with state law allowing start of construction within 12 months of permit issuance. Currently, our local amendment is for 6 months. Chapter 8.12, Building Code. Maintain prior local amendments per required findings included in resolution. Revise and update applicable references. Minor edits to remove internal redundancies. Expand fire retardant roofing standards for greater passive fire protection of buildings. Increase standards for seismic resiliency for roof decks. Important facilities like our city service building, light frame construction, concrete and masonry construction, hillside properties, suspended ceilings, and structural observation and special inspection requirements. And introduce a standard for intermodal shipping containers that is becoming a more and more popular element to use in building design. And the building, okay. Since this is so exciting, I've been told to. Chapter 8.18, Existing Building Code. We're just going to update the applicable references from the 2016 to the 2019. Chapter 8.20, Historic Building Code. We are adding this chapter to our local amendments, or we propose to add this chapter to our local amendments to adopt the 2019 California Historical Building Code. Chapter 8.22, Residential Building Code.
Could we not read the entire slide? I think it's in the agenda report, and I think we got the picture.
Okay. Chapter 8.22, Residential Building Code. Similar processes.
Very good.
And electrical code, mechanical code, plumbing code, it's very similar. We're just readopting the codes. Fire code, one of the main items is that they're going to add, or they propose to add to the Santa Monica Pier, treat the pier as a building for exiting purposes due to all the special events that they have there with the large occupant loads. They want to be able to treat the pier as a building. Fire life safety prevention. One of the items added is establish sprinkler requirements for accessory dwelling units. That's not currently in the code. And lastly, our seismic retrofit ordinances. We're just going to revise and update the applicable standards. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Council, any questions for the staff? Seeing none.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Councilmember, before you do that, I unfortunately do need to put up the, yes.
I'll change my motion. I'll move the staff recommendation incorporating the change of language we are advised by the city attorney to include.
Fantastic. And that change in language is at 8.08.060B, adding construction management plans as required by Chapter 8.98 of this code as the documents that may be required by the building officer for submission for applicants for building permits.
Okay. Moved by Winter. Second by Marina.
Oh, wait, no. We had a speaker.
Oh, we did? Oh, I'm sorry, Denise. I missed that one. Okay, my bad. Thank you for the staff report.
Okay, you're welcome.
Let's open our public hearing for our one speaker, Denise Barton.
Good evening. Regarding the updating of building code standards to 2019 California Building Code Standard Codes, except I do have to question some of your amendments, considering you claim to care so much about the residents and public safety and welfare. Then I'd have to question your gutting of the seismic portion of the California Building Standards Code. Here I would appreciate your explaining how international seismic building codes can account for the state's seismic activity better than the California Building Standard Codes. Or would the key here be on page 71 under 1704.6.2, under structural observation for seismic resistance, where number 2, the height of the structure is greater than 75 feet above the base, has been removed, as well as the tables to assess the risk of categories have also been removed, which can be found on page 112. Take the 4th, 5th in Arizona site where there is an active fault on 6th Street. Remember the Pep Boys, now Goodwill on 6th in Santa Monica's floor splitting open? Or the church on 6th in Arizona that completely fell down in the 1994 earthquake? Or the Geary project on Ocean to 2nd Street on Santa Monica Boulevard. Isn't there a fault that comes in from the coast and runs up the middle of Santa Monica Boulevard? So what would you do if your well-being index significantly dropped due to the tragedy at either of these sites due to your actions? So I'd have to ask, does this show you care about the safety, welfare, and well-being of the residents and public? Or is it another action showing you're in the pockets of the developers? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That closes our public hearing.
And I will reiterate my motion, having heard from the public.
Seconded by Marina. Motion by Winter.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember McKeown?
Yes.
Councilmember Moreno? Yes. Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
Yes.
Next, we have item I'm sorry. For this one, we have to do two
We have
votes.
to do another motion,
I'm
don't
sorry.
we?
Yes.
Yep. So the first motion addresses the resolution.
I'll move we introduce first reading the ordinance.
Introduce
as amended.
Motion by McEwen, second by Hara.
Okay.
And then we can actually combine the direction to staff to adopt the resolution and ordinance with following the second reading of the ordinance, but at least 30 days before the effective date of the codes. Do you want to make that a friendly amendment? Okay.
I do.
So motion by McEwen, second by Hara.
Councilmember Moreno? Yes. Councilmember McKeown?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
Yes. And that passes unanimously. Thank you.
So now we'll go to 13A. It's recommendation to accept a Julie Katz resignation from the Housing Commission and authorize the city clerk to publish the vacancy. And you have no request to speak.
I move we accept with great regret.
Second.
By acclamation?
Acclamation,
Or,
yes.
okay.
By voice vote.
Voice vote?
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? That passes unanimously. 13B.
13B is request from Councilmember Winter that council approve use of travel funds to attend the 2019 Cities Thrive Mental Health Conference in New York City, November 18th and 19th. And you have no request to speak on this.
Councilmember Winter.
We all got an email that Mayor Davis had been invited to this conference and was unable to attend, and did anybody from the council choose to attend in her place? And I thought that given the importance of mental health the challenges we have in our community, whether it's within our unhoused population or with our kids at our high school or our general overall well-being, that it might be prudent for one of us to attend. So I indicated I would do so, but it requires this authorization.
Will this include any couch time?
Couch time?
Mental health conference.
No personal therapy.
Yes. No, this will be group therapy. Depends on the outcome of the series against the Astros.
I move we authorize the use of those funds.
After that tough line of questioning, all those in favor? Oh,
think, well,
I'm sorry,
sorry.
it's a roll call because we're spending money.
This is money. Councilmember Moreno? Yes. Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
Yes.
Okay. Next, we have 13C, and it's request from Mayor Davis, who's not here. Council members Winter and Morena that the council use $19,065 of its discretionary fund to support expansion of the mariachi music program in the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. The money will be designed or designated for the Santa Monica Education Foundation, which is a primary financial supporter of the program. And you have no request to speak.
Somebody want to tell us about this? Councilmember Marina? Turn on your mic.
Since Councilmember Hemmerich is not here, you should still turn on your microphone.
I have personified her. I am a product of Samuel High and of its music program, and it's always a challenge to support the nuances in music and the great variability that it provides. So mariachi, in addition to being of significant cultural relevance to us, it's also one of those niches that can fall through the cracks and becomes difficult to find funding for. So it's my great honor to support this program as Samuel High alumni and specifically as a former musician.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just say that obviously we are blessed to have a school district which has one of the more exemplary music programs in the state. This mariachi program has been an enormous success since its inception. There's something about mariachi that draws together people of all cultures. One of my favorite moments of my life was when I lived in New York City years ago. There was a group of Japanese diplomats who played mariachi music, and that was true cultural diversity, let me tell you.
Good work.
So
Do we have
that
a
I'll
motion?
move that we allocate the funds.
Motion by Winter, second by Marina. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Kim?
Yes.
Councilmember Morena? Yes. And Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
Yes.
Next, we have 13D, and it's request of Mayor Davis and Councilmember McCune that the council authorize up to $25,000 of council discretionary funds for the city manager's office to convene a census complete count committee to launch and conduct community outreach and education efforts for the 2020 census, including targeting outreach for hard to count areas and populations as designation by the U.S. Census Bureau and bilingual outreach materials. And you have no request to speak.
If I may?
You may.
I think we're all aware of the attempted games playing at the Washington level coming from the White House and trying to distort the upcoming census by creating fear in some communities about participating. And I hope we all realize how important the U.S. Census is in terms of funding, in terms of how many representatives California gets in Congress, and in terms of all sorts of things. This is why our Constitution calls for a census to be done every 10 years, and 2020 is the year. Actually, I convened this committee a couple of months ago, sitting in for the current mayor. I will be the mayor next year when it completes its work, which is why we're both on this item. I think it's crucially important that in Santa Monica, our complete count committee be empowered to do the kinds of outreach and education efforts it will take to make sure that everyone in our community knows to be counted and that it's safe to be counted and that they can participate in this without fear, which has been foisted upon them at the national level, which I think we can correct at the local level. So we're asking for some funding to help us with the outreach. And I'll move that we grant that funding.
Second.
Motion by McEwen, second by Winter. Any other discussion? Can we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Morena? Yes. Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Hara?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem O'Day?
Yes, that passes unanimously. 13E.
And 13E is a request of Mayor Davis and Councilmember Winter that the city staff review the recent report issued by the Los Angeles City Attorney on September 18, 2019, related to banning the retail sale of flavored tobacco products and e-cigarettes, closely following any actions taken by the Los Angeles City Council in response, and return with proposed action to ensure a consistent regional approach in discouraging the purchase and use of tobacco products and e-cigarettes by our youth. And you have no request to speak on this.
Well, since
Councilmember Winter.
Mayor Davis has made a lot of requests this evening that she's not here to follow up on.
She even came by video.
I guess I'll jump in on this one. You know, yeah, it's the confluence of a bunch of things. I think all of us have heard over the last couple of years concerns expressed to us about vaping among our youth from various community members. But the challenge for me has always been, you know, if we enact a ban or regulation framework within our own small 8.3 square miles, it really doesn't do much to deter the use, because people want those products will just go to Venice or West LA, whatever. But fortunately, in discussing the issue with the city attorney, we discovered that the city of Los Angeles is moving in this direction, so it made sense to us to pay attention to what they intend to do and at some point promulgate similar rules and regulations so that we have a more unified regional approach to this issue. And I think we've all read in the media recently about the significant health problems that are coming out of this and the issues we've heard. I heard specifically from one of the school board members about what goes on at Samo High and in our middle schools. It's an issue that they're feeling they're powerless to address unless the city takes some sort of action and regulation. So I will move this item.
Motion by Winter.
Second.
Second by Morena. Any other discussion? Can we have a roll call vote? Oh, we can do this by voice. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? None. That's unanimously approved. Thank you very much. We're ready to adjourn. I don't have any requests for an adjournment tonight, which is nice news. So I'll just adjourn by saying have a good evening. Thank you. See you next week, folks.